He fixed her car in the rain and asked for nothing. She owned half the city and had never met anyone like him. 3 months later, one fake relationship would destroy everything and force them both to choose between the lives they built and the ones they actually wanted. Like this video and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now settle in. This one's going to take a while, and it's worth every minute. The storm came in fast. 1 hour, it was a regular Thursday evening in late October. The kind where the sky goes purple at the edges and the air smells like wet concrete in someone's dinner. The next hour, the rain was coming down so hard it turned headlights into blurs and made the highway feel like the bottom of a river. Nathan Reed had been driving home from his second job. Not the garage. The garage was his real work, the thing he'd built over 6 years with his own hands, and a loan he was still paying off. The second job was at a parts warehouse on the east side of the city, 3 nights a week, 7 p.m. to midnight, loading and unloading truck shipments. His back hated him for it. His hands were permanently stained with grease in the creases of his knuckles, no matter how hard he scrubbed. But the extra $1,400 a month covered Chloe's medications, and that was the only math that mattered. He was 40 minutes from home when he saw the hazard lights. A vehicle was pulled over on the right shoulder of Route 9, just past the overpass where the guardrail had been dented for 3 years and the county never fixed it. The hazards blinked orange through the curtain of rain, slow and steady, like a pulse. Nathan's first instinct was to keep going. He was tired in the specific way that lives in your bones rather than your muscles, the kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. He had to be back at the garage by 7 in the morning. Chloe's school was doing some kind of presentation tomorrow, and she'd asked him 3 times to make sure he remembered to pack her poster, which was currently rolled up and held together with a rubber band and sitting on the kitchen counter at home. And he told her he remembered, and he did remember, and if he was late getting home tonight, he would still pack the poster first thing in the morning before he drove her to school. But every minute counted. He drove past the vehicle. Then he looked in the rearview mirror. It was an SUV, black, expensive. Even through the rain, he could see the body lines were clean and the wheels were something aftermarket. Whoever owned it wasn't in distress in the way that meant danger. This wasn't a crashed car. But the SUV was sitting at a slight angle and both rear hazards were working, which meant the driver had pulled over deliberately and not hit anything. Flat tire, maybe. Or something under the hood. He watched the orange flicker in his rear view for another 3 seconds. Then he pulled a U-turn. He'd made a lot of decisions in his life he could trace back to small moments of choice, taking the community college mechanic certification instead of the 4-year engineering program, staying in Phoenix instead of moving back east when things fell apart with Chloe's mother, signing the lease on the garage space on the corner of Dunmore and 5th when everyone told him it was too expensive for a first-time shop owner. All those moments looked like nothing at the time, just a gut feeling, just the turn of a wheel. He pulled in behind the SUV, left his own hazards running, and got out into the rain. It was the kind of rain that makes any movement feel useless. He had a jacket in the cab, a Carhartt that was 3 seasons old and had a tear in the left pocket. And he pulled it on as he jogged forward, but it didn't do much. By the time he reached the driver's side window, he was soaked from the collar down. He knocked. There was a pause. Then the window came down about 4 inches. The woman behind the wheel was maybe 28, 30. Dark hair, wet at the temples where it had come loose from something. Her face was controlled in that specific way that people who are used to being in public learn to hold, not quite blank, but guarded. No panic, just assessment. She was looking at him the way anyone looks at a stranger in the dark, and the rain, which was to say she was looking at him like he might be a problem. "You need help?" Nathan said, which wasn't eloquent, but it was accurate. She hesitated. "I pulled over because the steering started pulling hard to the right. I thought it was a flat, but I couldn't tell." "Pop your hazards, stay inside." He gestured toward the front of the vehicle. "I'll check it." "You don't have to." "I'm a mechanic," he said. "It's fine, stay dry." He didn't wait for her to argue. The front passenger tire was flat. Not just low, fully blown. The rubber sitting wrong against the rim. The sidewall cracked from driving on it even a short distance. She'd felt the pull and pulled over before it got worse, which was the right call, and also meant the rim itself was probably okay. He checked it in the rain with his phone flashlight, crouching in the puddle that had already formed along the shoulder, water soaking through the knees of his jeans. He went back to the window. "Blown front tire," he said. "Your rim's okay. You got a spare?" Yes, I think so. There should be one. I'll need your keys to pop the back." Another pause. He watched her think it through, watched the calculation happen. She reached into the cup holder, then stopped. "I have roadside assistance," she said. "I can just call—" "You're welcome to," Nathan said. "In this weather on a Thursday night, you're looking at probably 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours." He straightened up, wiped water off his face with the back of his wrist. "Up to you. I've got the tools in my truck." She looked at him for another moment. Then she held out the key fob. He took it without making a production out of it and went to the back. The spare was there. Full size, thankfully. Not one of those miniature donut spares that manufacturers put in newer vehicles as an insult. He pulled it out, checked the pressure the best he could in the dark, and dragged it around to the front. His truck had a hydraulic floor jack and a proper impact wrench because Nathan had never once in his life operated out of a basic roadside kit. He got the SUV up, pulled the blown tire, and had the spare seated and torqued down in under 20 minutes. He lowered the vehicle, gave the wheel a shake to check the seating, and stood up. The rain had eased slightly. Not enough to matter, but enough that he could see the woman had gotten out of the SUV and was standing near the front, arms crossed over her chest, watching him work. She'd pulled her jacket tighter. She had on clothes that were expensive without being obvious about it. Not the kind of person trying to show off, but the kind who'd long since stopped buying things that weren't good quality. "You didn't have to get out," he said. "I felt guilty sitting in there." "Don't." He started loading the blown tire into the back of his truck. "You paid for the vehicle. Being in it is the point." She watched him do it. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing." "That's not— I didn't do it for money." He closed the tailgate. "The spare's a full size so you can drive normally, but get the flat replaced soon. That spare's got some years on it. I'd give it maybe 3,000 miles on a good day." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a card. He caught the color of it, matte, black with silver lettering, and held it out toward him. "At least let me—" "Keep it." He opened his truck door. "You'd have done the same." He said it the way people say things they actually believe rather than things they think sound good. He believed it because he wanted to believe it. Because at the end of a long night in the rain, when his back hurt and his jeans were soaked through and he still had 40 minutes of driving ahead of him, it was easier to believe that people were basically decent and would help each other out when it counted. She put the card back in her pocket. "What's your name?" she asked. "Nathan." He got in the truck. "Get home safe." He pulled back onto the highway before she could say anything else. Oh, he didn't think about her on the drive home. He thought about Chloe's poster, which was still on the kitchen counter in a rubber band. He thought about the transmission job he had coming in first thing tomorrow morning, a 2017 Tacoma belonging to a guy named Marcus, who drove for a delivery company and needed the truck back by Friday because his livelihood was in it. He thought about the fact that he was supposed to call Chloe's cardiologist back about the results from her last echocardiogram, and that he'd been putting it off for 3 days because he was afraid of what the results were going to say. He pulled into the driveway of the house he rented on Whitfield Street at 12:47 a.m. The light in Chloe's room was off, which meant Mrs. Cabrera from next door had put her to bed on time, which meant he owed Mrs. Cabrera the good coffee he'd been holding back for special occasions. He let himself in as quietly as he could, locked up behind him, and stood in the kitchen for a minute with the lights off. The poster was on the counter, exactly where he said it would be. He put his keys in the bowl by the door, pulled off his wet jacket, and hung it over a chair to dry. He stood at the counter and drank a glass of water. The kitchen was small, the whole house was small, but he'd made it feel like something. Chloe's drawings were on the refrigerator, held up with magnets shaped like different states from a road trip he'd promised her they'd take when she was stronger. There was a ceramic bowl on the table where they kept loose change and her hair ties. The dish rack had 2 plates and 1 small cup. He went down the hall and pushed open Chloe's door just far enough to see her. She was asleep on her side, her hair spread out on the pillow, one arm curled around a stuffed rabbit named Gerald that was missing an eye and had been through the wash so many times his fur had gone from orange to pale gold. She made a small sound in her sleep, something between a sigh and a word, and pulled the blanket up without waking. Nathan stood in the doorway for longer than he meant to. She was 8 years old and she had a heart defect that had been diagnosed at 3 and had been managed, imperfectly, expensively, constantly, since then. Pulmonary stenosis. He had learned more about cardiac anatomy than any mechanic should have to. He knew what her echocardiograms were supposed to show and what they weren't supposed to show. He knew the names of 5 different cardiologists in 3 different cities and could tell you their specialties and their publication histories and their waiting lists. He knew which of her medications had to be taken with food and which could be taken on an empty stomach, and he kept a color-coded chart of her dosing schedule on his phone because the alternative was forgetting, and forgetting wasn't an option. He was 32 years old, and he was tired in a way that felt permanent. But she was asleep, and she was okay. And the poster was on the counter, and tomorrow was another day. He pulled her door mostly closed and went to his room. Contact. He found out about the woman the next morning. He hadn't slept enough. He never did. But the alarm pulled him up at 6:15 and he was dressed and in the kitchen making Chloe's breakfast by 6:30. She came out of her room in her school clothes, her hair already braided because she'd learned to do it herself the previous year and considered it a point of pride, holding Gerald by one ear. "You came home late," she said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. "Woman broke down on the highway, flat tire." Chloe put Gerald on the chair beside her and sat down. "Did you fix it?" "Wasn't hard." "Did she say thank you?" He thought about it. "Not exactly. She tried to pay me." Chloe considered this. "That's kind of the same thing." "Sure." He put a plate of eggs in front of her. "Poster's on the counter." "I saw it." She picked up her fork. "Mrs. Cabrera let me watch TV until 9. "I know." "She let me watch the real news, not the kid news." "I'll talk to her." "Don't." Chloe looked up. It was interesting. There was a thing about a company, Kensington Technologies. The lady who runs it. She said the name carefully, the way kids say things they've heard adults say, testing the pronunciation. "She's very fancy." Nathan poured his coffee. "She's 30. She runs like the whole company herself. The news people were saying she's one of the youngest billionaires in the country." Chloe stabbed a piece of egg thoughtfully. "Is a billion more than a million?" "A lot more." "How much more?" 1,000 millions is a billion." Chloe was quiet for a moment, doing some internal calculation. "That's crazy." "Eat your eggs." He got his phone off the counter to check the time and saw the notification. A Google alert he'd accidentally set up years ago when he was trying to track parts availability and had never bothered to remove. The alert was for local news, which it pulled broadly and indiscriminately, and the top story was a brief item from the Phoenix Metro business desk. Ava Kensington, CEO of Kensington Technologies, was briefly stranded on Route 9 late Thursday evening following a tire blowout during severe weather. A spokesperson confirmed that Ms. Kensington was assisted by a passing motorist and arrived safely at her destination. Ms. Kensington declined to comment further on the incident. He looked at the article for a moment. Then he looked at the name of the highway. Then he put his phone face down on the counter and finished his coffee. The garage was called Reed's Auto, which was not a creative name but was an accurate one, and it sat on the corner of Dunmore and Fifth in a part of the city that was technically transitional, which was the word that real estate listings used when they meant it used to be rough and was now on its way to being priced out of the range of the people who'd always lived there. It was a 3-bay shop with a small front office, a parts room in the back that was organized by a system only Nathan fully understood, and a waiting area with 4 chairs and a coffee maker that was older than Chloe. He had one full-time employee, Danny, who was 24 and had been with him 2 years, and could diagnose an engine knock by ear the way some people can identify birds by their calls. And he had part-time help on Saturdays from a kid named Tomas, who was 17 and wanted to open his own shop someday, and Nathan let him work for experience and a small hourly wage because he remembered being 17 and nobody letting him touch anything real. Marcus's Tacoma came in at 7:30, and Nathan had it diagnosed by 8. Torque converter. Not cheap, but not the worst-case scenario. He called Marcus to go over the estimate, and Marcus said what everyone said when you told them the estimate, which was a silence followed by, "Yeah, okay," in the tone of a man looking at his bank account and doing depressing arithmetic. "I can try to find a remanufactured unit," Nathan said. "It'll save you about $300 over OEM. Yeah, do that. Whatever gets it done by Friday. I'll call you when the part's confirmed." He ordered the part, started the paperwork, and by 9 o'clock had his head under the hood of a Honda Accord that belonged to a woman named Patricia, who was 67 and had owned the car for 11 years and considered it family. Danny was underneath a Silverado on the second lift, doing brake work, when he said, without looking up, "You see that thing on the news this morning?" "What thing?" "Ava Kensington, the tech CEO, broke down on Route 9 last night." A pause, the sound of a ratchet. "Said some guy stopped and changed her tire." Nathan adjusted his position against the engine block. "Saw it." Another pause. "That was you, wasn't it?" "Don't make it a thing, Danny." "I'm not making it a thing. I'm just—" "It was a flat tire. She was stranded. I changed it." He pulled the air filter housing loose and checked the filter. "Filthy." He set it aside to replace. "It's not a story. The news made it a story. The news makes everything a story." Danny was quiet for a moment. "She's the one whose family is trying to force her into that merger. The one on the business channels every other week." Nathan had no idea what Danny was talking about and said so. "Her family owns like 40% of Kensington Technologies, her dad and her two uncles. They've been trying to get her to merge with this other tech company, Voss Group, I think, for 2 years. She keeps saying no, but apparently the shareholders are starting to lean toward the family's side." A pause. "My girlfriend watches a lot of business news." "How is Sarah?" "Good. She wants to know if Chloe wants to come to her cousin's birthday thing on the 14th. "I'll check her calendar." Nathan meant Chloe's medical calendar, not her social calendar, and Danny knew it and didn't say anything. 3 days passed. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, a black SUV pulled into the lot in front of Reed's Auto and parked, and a woman got out who was not Patricia with her Honda or Marcus waiting on his Tacoma or any of Nathan's regulars. She was dressed plainly, dark jeans, a jacket, hair pulled back. She looked like someone trying not to look like herself, which was something Nathan recognized from the handful of times he'd seen celebrities pass through the area on their way to the resorts further north. That particular studied casualness, the way expensive things look when someone is trying to make them look cheap. He was coming out of the parts room when he saw her through the small window in the office door, and he stopped. She was looking at the board on the wall of the waiting area where he'd hung Chloe's drawings. He'd put them up last year as a joke, mostly, his 8-year-old art critic's opinion of the garage, but customers seemed to like them. There were 7 drawings total, a car that looked like it was melting, a wrench that was bigger than the person holding it, a dog that Chloe had labeled customer's dog, mean, after a golden retriever had barked at her for an entire oil change. The woman was looking at the dog drawing when Nathan pushed through the office door. She turned, and there it was. The same face from the highway, the same controlled expression, but different now because there was no rain and no emergency, and she didn't have a reason to be guarded. Also because she recognized him at the same moment he recognized her. "Hi," she said. He looked at her. Then he looked at the front window where the SUV was parked, and even from this angle he could see the front right tire was the same spare he'd put on 4 days ago, the temporary fix he'd told her to replace in 3,000 miles. "You drove on that tire," he said. She blinked. "What?" "The spare I put on. I said to replace it within 3,000 miles. You drove on it for 4 days. He came out from behind the counter. "How many miles have you done?" I don't know, a few days of commuting. In Phoenix, a few days of commuting could be 400 miles. Could be more. If that tire blows on the highway..." He stopped himself. He was doing the thing he did where concern came out as a lecture. "Come on," he said more evenly. "Let me take a look at it." She followed him outside. He crouched at the front passenger wheel and checked the spare. It had worn unevenly, which meant the alignment on this vehicle was slightly off, something the blown tire had probably masked. and there was a small crack developing at the tread edge that didn't need to become a problem but would if she kept driving on it. He stood up. "It's okay for now, but you need a new tire. I can do it today if you want." "Actually, that's not—" She paused. "I mean, yes, I would like that, but that's not entirely why I came." He waited. She seemed to be deciding how to phrase something. Up close, she looked less like her own press coverage than he would have expected. There was a tiredness in her face that the Business Channel interviews didn't show, and she was doing something with her hands, a small gesture, a ring on her right hand that she kept turning, that looked like a nervous habit she was trying to suppress. "You know who I am," she said. "I do now. I didn't on Thursday." "I know. That's—" She stopped. "That's sort of why I came." She looked at him directly. "How do you feel about coffee?" Absent. There was a diner 2 blocks down called Manny's that Nathan ate lunch at twice a week when he remembered to eat lunch, which was not always. It had vinyl booths and laminated menus and coffee that was strong in the way that meant it had been on the burner too long. And the owner, Manuel, was 61 and had been running the place for 23 years and had an opinion about everything. Nathan and Ava Kensington sat in a booth at the back, and Nathan ordered the coffee because he always ordered the coffee, and she ordered it too, probably because she didn't want to be the kind of person who didn't order the coffee. She wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at him across the table. "I wanted to say thank you properly," she said. "What you did on Thursday. You didn't have to stop. Anyone would have." "No," she said. "They really wouldn't." She said it without bitterness, just flatly, as a statement of personal experience. "I sat there for 8 minutes before you pulled over. 7 cars passed." He didn't have an answer to that. "I also wanted to ask you something." She turned the mug in her hands. "You didn't want to be paid. You didn't take the card. You didn't ask me any questions. You didn't—" She stopped. "You didn't look at me like I was anything other than a person with a flat tire. That's what you were. People don't usually—" She started again. "I'm usually aware, in every interaction I have, that people know who I am, even when they're trying to pretend they don't. You genuinely didn't know." "I did know by the morning, but not then." "Not then," he agreed. She looked at him for a moment. "What's your name?" "I told you on the highway." "Your last name?" "Reed." He picked up his coffee. "Nathan Reed." She nodded slowly. "I looked up your shop." He wasn't surprised. "Okay. You've been there 6 years. You have good reviews. Really good reviews, actually. Specifically people saying you didn't try to upsell them or tell them they needed repairs they didn't need." She paused. "That's apparently rare enough that people feel the need to mention it." "It shouldn't be." "No, but it is." She set her mug down. "Do you have family?" "A daughter," he said. 8 years old." "Just the 2 of you?" "Just the 2 of us." She didn't ask about the mother. He was grateful for that. He'd learned to read the question in people's faces before they asked it, and to have an answer ready, but with her, the question didn't seem to form. She just moved on. "I'm sorry for dropping in on your garage," she said. "I know it was strange." "It was a little strange," he said. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. "I'm not great at normal." She said it dryly, self-aware. "I never learned how. I went from being my father's daughter to being my company's CEO. There wasn't a lot of room in between for learning how to show up at a mechanic's shop like a regular person." "You did fine," Nathan said. "You knocked. That's the main thing." She laughed. It was a small laugh, caught off guard, the kind that isn't performed. He found that he liked it. It made her look 3 years younger. They talked for 45 minutes. He found out that she'd started Kensington Technologies at 22 with seed money she'd argued out of her father, that she'd grown it into one of the largest privately held tech companies in the country through a combination of talent and stubbornness and a few decisions that had been genuinely brilliant in hindsight but felt closer to desperate at the time. He found out that she had an apartment in Phoenix and a house in San Francisco that she barely used and an office she spent more time in than either of them. He found out that she was methodical about things that mattered to her and careless about things that didn't, and that she was currently struggling to care about a great many things that the people around her considered important. He told her about the garage, the loan, the 3 bays, Danny and Tomas. He told her about the parts warehouse job, which she received with the same quiet he'd noticed in her. Not shock, not pity, just attention. He mentioned Chloe in a passing way, not making a thing of it, and she received that the same way too. Outside, Manuel was refilling the glass sugar dispensers 2 tables over and pretending he wasn't listening, which Nathan knew because he knew Manuel. When they left, she stood on the sidewalk for a moment, and the October light caught her face, and she looked, for just that second, like someone who had forgotten to be somewhere. "I'll bring the SUV back for that tire," she said. "Anytime," he said. "Call ahead so I can order the right size." She got out her phone, and he gave her the shop number, and she put it in, and they stood there for a moment with both of them aware that this was a strange thing that had happened, and neither of them entirely sure what it was. "Thank you," she said, "for the coffee." "You paid." "You came." She put her phone back in her pocket. "That counts." Bitte. She came back Wednesday for the tire. Not Ava Kensington, billionaire CEO, in the way that the business news would have described her. Just a woman in a black SUV who pulled into the lot at noon and waited on one of the 4 chairs in the waiting area while Danny pulled the spare and mounted and balanced a new tire. She sat in the waiting area and looked at Chloe's drawings on the wall, and when Nathan came out of the shop to tell her it was ready, she asked him about the dog one. "Customer's golden retriever," he said. "Chloe was here one Saturday and it barked at her the whole time." "How long was the appointment?" 45 minutes. She looked at the drawing. Chloe's crayon golden retriever, boxy and furious, with the label "Customer's dog, mean," in careful 8-year-old handwriting. Did she cry? No. She cried in the car on the way home, though, and then she drew the picture, and then she felt better. Ava looked at the drawing for a moment longer. "She sounds resilient." He felt the word land somewhere in his chest in a way he wasn't expecting. Resilient was the word doctors used about Chloe, in that careful way that meant things are harder for her, but she keeps going. He wasn't used to hearing it as a compliment rather than a diagnosis. "She is," he said. "She really is." The tire came to $240. Ava paid without discussion. She stood at the counter and signed the receipt and looked up once while she was doing it, and he was looking at the service sheet, and when he looked up, she looked back down. "I'll come back Thursday," she said. "You need something else done?" "My rear wipers are leaving streaks." "That's a $20 fix." "I know." She picked up her keys. "But I want it done right." She left. Danny watched her go from under the hood of a Jeep Cherokee, then looked at Nathan. Nathan went back into the parts room. She came Thursday. She came the following Tuesday. She brought the SUV and twice more in the following 2 weeks for things that were real repairs. The alignment issue he'd noticed, a serpentine belt that was cracking, and twice for things that were, if he was honest, not entirely urgent. A stuck cup holder. Headlight calibration that was slightly off but functionally fine. She always stayed. Not dramatically. She wasn't hovering. She sat in the waiting area with her phone, and sometimes she worked and sometimes she didn't. Occasionally she and Nathan talked when he came out for parts or to update her on the job, and the conversations were longer than they needed to be. He started noticing things. The way she watched him when he was explaining a repair. Not waiting for him to finish talking, but actually listening, tracking what he was saying. The way she didn't perform interest. The way she drank the terrible coffee from the old coffee maker without complaining. The way she asked about Chloe with a genuine curiosity that wasn't angled toward sympathy or the kind of pointed questions that were really about something else. He also noticed the things she didn't show. She never arrived or left dramatically. No entourage, no calls she needed to take urgently, no signals that being at a mechanic's shop in a transitional neighborhood was beneath her. But once, when her phone lit up while she was waiting, he happened to be walking past and saw the preview of the text before she turned it over. Father called again. Insists the Voss meeting happen before end of year. Please call back. She didn't call back. He didn't say he'd seen it. But on a Friday in the 3rd week of her appearances, Chloe was at the garage. She came in sometimes after school, on the days when Mrs. Cabrera couldn't take her and the after-school program ended at 4. Nathan had a system for it. She had a designated spot in the office with her homework and her snacks and Gerald, And she knew the rules, which were primarily no touching anything in the shop and no going near any vehicle that was on a lift. She was at the desk doing her homework when Ava came in. They looked at each other. Chloe, who was 8 and therefore had no concept of guarding her reactions, said, "You're the tire lady." Ava stopped. "I'm sorry?" "Dad said a lady had a flat tire and he fixed it. Are you her?" She examined Ava with the frank attention of a child who has not yet learned that staring is rude. "You're very nice looking." "Chloe," Nathan said from the doorway. "What? She is." Chloe turned back to her homework with the serenity of someone who had stated a fact and couldn't be expected to apologize for it. Ava looked at Nathan. He looked at the ceiling briefly. "That's Chloe," he said unnecessarily. "I gathered." She came to the counter. Something in her expression had gone different. Softer, maybe, or more careful. The way people are when they're around children and aren't sure of the rules. She glanced at the desk where Chloe was working, at the backpack on the floor with a heart-shaped keychain on the zipper pull, at Gerald sitting on top of a math workbook with the impassive dignity of a stuffed animal who has seen much. "What's your rabbit's name?" she asked Chloe. Chloe looked up. "Gerald?" "Gerald is a great name for a rabbit." Chloe considered this. "He's missing an eye." "I noticed. A kid at school said he looks creepy. I said that was rude." Chloe looked at her steadily. "It's rude to say things about people's rabbits." "Completely agree," Ava said, without hesitation. Chloe seemed to decide this was the correct answer. She looked back down at her homework. "You can sit there," she said, gesturing at the chair beside her desk. "I don't mind." Nathan watched Ava Kensington, billionaire, sit down in the waiting area of his garage next to his 8-year-old daughter and a one-eyed stuffed rabbit. And he thought about all the decisions that had led to this particular moment, and he couldn't trace any of them. He went back into the shop. From behind him, he heard Chloe say, "Do you know how fractions work?" And Ava's voice, after a pause, "I went to MIT. I think I can manage fractions." "Good," Chloe said, "because I'm not sure about these ones." The conversation happened at the end of November. Nathan was closing up the shop, running the last checks before he locked the bays, and Ava was sitting on the front bumper of her SUV in the lot outside. She did that sometimes, not quite leaving, not quite asking him to talk, just present in the way she'd been for the past 5 weeks. He'd stopped questioning it the way he'd initially questioned it. The garage had become a place she came, and he'd gotten used to it the way you get used to any new fact of your life. She had a coffee from the diner. He'd stopped being surprised by that too. He pulled down the bay doors and locked them and went out to where she was sitting, and she looked up when she heard him and shifted slightly, not making room for him to sit, but acknowledging that the conversation was starting. "I have a proposal," she said. He leaned against the truck. "Okay." She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. The night was cold, November cold, which in Phoenix still meant 50s rather than anything serious, but was cold enough that you could see your breath. "My family's trying to force a merger," she said. "With the Voss Group. You probably heard about it." "Danny told me. His girlfriend watches business news." She made a short sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "It's a bad deal. It looks good on paper, but it's structured to strip most of my operational control within 18 months. My father knows that. He does it anyway because he wants the liquidity event." She looked down at her coffee. "There's also a personal component. They want me to marry Voss's son. Officially, it's not a condition of the merger. Unofficially, my father has made it very clear that a family alliance would secure everyone's interests." Nathan said nothing. He was listening in the way he'd learned to listen, which was without loading the next thing he was going to say while she was still talking. "The pressure is becoming—" She stopped. "I need it to stop. I need them to stop the calls and the meetings and the articles they're placing in trade publications to move shareholder sentiment." She looked up at him. "I need them to believe the personal angle is off the table." He understood where this was going. He waited anyway. "I'm asking you to be my boyfriend," she said, "publicly, for 3 months. Attend some functions, be seen with me, make it real enough that nobody can dismiss it." She said it directly, the way she said most things. Not asking for his reaction to manage, just stating the thing and letting him process it. "I'll pay you. Enough to matter." The lot was quiet. A car passed on Dunmore, headlights sweeping across the pavement. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. He thought about the echocardiogram results, which he had finally called about, which had not been the news he'd been hoping for. He thought about the specialist in Houston who had a 90-day waiting list and a consultation fee that was more than a month of his warehouse wages. He thought about Chloe doing fractions in the waiting room with a woman who'd gone to MIT. "How much?" he said. She told him. He looked at the sky for a moment. The numbers were real. They were real in the specific way that changed things. The kind of number that meant Chloe could see the Houston specialist. That meant the second job at the warehouse could end. That meant he could stop doing the math in the middle of the night about which bill to move to next month. He looked back at her. 3 months, he said. 3 months, she confirmed. It stays clean, he said. It's a performance, nothing more. She met his eyes. Agreed. He held out his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then shook it. Firm, no hesitation, the handshake of someone who had closed contracts before and knew what the gesture meant. Okay, Nathan said. He picked up the last of his gear and started walking toward the door. Nathan, her voice behind him. He turned. She was still sitting on the bumper, coffee in hand, looking at him with an expression he couldn't read and didn't try to. You should know, she said, that I'm not good at this. At any of this. I'm not... She paused. I don't have a lot of people in my life I trust. I don't know how to do this without messing it up. He considered that for a moment. Neither do I, he said. So we'll figure it out. He unlocked the shop door and went inside, and behind him the lot was quiet, and the night was cold, and somewhere across the city, in a house on Whitfield Street, his daughter was doing her homework with a one-eyed rabbit watching over her shoulder, waiting for him to come home. The first thing Nathan realized, the morning after agreeing to Ava Kensington's proposal, was that he had no idea what he'd actually agreed to. He knew the outline. 3 months. Public appearances. A performance convincing enough to neutralize the family pressure around the Voss merger. He'd shaken her hand on it and meant it the way he meant most things, completely, in the moment, without room for second guessing. But lying in the dark at 4:30 in the morning, listening to the house settle and the distant sound of a truck on Whitfield Street, he turned it over and found edges he hadn't checked. What did publicly mean exactly? What events? How often? Did he need different clothes? He looked at the ceiling and thought, with a particular kind of weariness, that his entire wardrobe consisted of work shirts, 2 pairs of dark jeans, and 1 button-down he'd bought for a parent-teacher conference that still had the dry cleaning tag on it. He also thought about Chloe. He hadn't told her. He wasn't sure how to, or even what to say. Hey, remember the tire lady? She's paying me to pretend to date her. He ran the sentence in his head and discarded it immediately. Chloe was 8, but she was 8 in the way that some children are. Sharply observant, easily worried, capable of reading tone better than she could read a clock. She'd been watching him for years the way kids watch parents who carry things alone, looking for the signs. He'd tell her something. Not a lie, but a version. He'd figure out the version. At 6, he got up and made coffee. Ava called at 8:15 while he was under the Honda Accord again, finishing the work Patricia had authorized. He wiped his hands on a rag and answered. I should have given you more information last night, she said without preamble. Before you agreed. I agreed with the information I had. Still. There was a sound in the background, traffic or a city, and he pictured her walking somewhere, her phone to her ear, already in motion. There's an event next weekend, my company's annual donor reception. It's formal, so, I can arrange whatever you need for that, clothing, whatever. I don't mean that in a condescending way. I know you don't. A brief pause. You're sure? Ava. He leaned against the bay wall. I grew up working. I know what it means when someone offers practical help. It doesn't mean anything except that they're being practical. She was quiet for a moment. Okay, good. Another pause. There's something else. My father, once this becomes public, he's going to investigate you. He has people for that. I want you to know that up front. Nathan thought about what an investigation of him would find. A mechanic with good reviews and a small business loan, a father with a sick kid and a second job, clean record, no drama, nothing to hide and nothing impressive either. "Okay," he said. "You're not worried?" "I'm not hiding anything." "Most people have something they don't want looked at." "Most people aren't mechanics," he said. "Everything I've done is on paper somewhere. Parts invoices, tax returns, medical bills." He paused. "A lot of medical bills." She was quiet again in the way that meant she was listening rather than waiting. "Chloe's condition," he said. "If your people find it, and they will, I'd rather you hear it from me first. She has a heart defect, pulmonary stenosis. It's managed, but it's not fixed, and we're looking at a possible intervention in the next year. That's what the money is for." He said it the way he'd learned to say it, flatly, factually, without the weight he actually felt about it, because the weight didn't help anything. "Nathan," she said, "I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you so you're not caught off guard." "I know." Her voice was different, quieter. "Thank you for telling me." He went back under the Accord when he hung up, and he didn't think about the conversation again until much later that night, when he was putting Chloe to bed, and she asked out of nowhere, "Is the tire lady going to come back to the garage?" He tucked the blanket up. "Probably." Chloe turned Gerald over in her hands. "I like her. She's honest." "You've met her twice." "I know." She looked up at him. "But she didn't talk to me like I was little. She explained the fractions like they were real fractions, not pretend easy fractions." She paused. "Mrs. Cabrera does the pretend easy fractions. It's annoying." "I'll mention it to Mrs. Cabrera," he said. "Don't." Chloe settled into the pillow. "Just, she can come back if she wants." He turned the light off. "Dad?" Her voice in the dark. "Yeah. You seem different this week." He stood in the doorway. "Different how?" A pause. "Like you're thinking about something, a lot." "I think about a lot of things." "This is new thinking." She said it with the precision of someone reporting a data point. "It's okay. I just noticed." He said goodnight and pulled the door mostly closed and stood in the hall for a moment with his hand on the wall and thought about how it was impossible to keep anything from her, and he'd never really understood how parents tried. The donor reception was on a Saturday at a venue downtown that had the kind of understated design that meant it was very expensive. Clean lines, warm light, the particular hush of money that didn't need to announce itself. The car Ava had sent picked Nathan up at 7. He'd taken Danny's advice and bought a new button-down, which he wore with dark slacks and the one pair of dress shoes he owned, which were from 3 years ago and still fit. He'd looked at himself in the bathroom mirror before leaving and made a decision not to overthink it. He was who he was. If that wasn't the right version of a person for this room, he didn't have another version available. Ava was waiting near the entrance. She had on a dress the color of deep green, and her hair was down, and she looked completely different and exactly like herself at the same time, which was a quality he was learning was particular to her. She looked at him when he approached, and something in her expression settled, like a question she'd been carrying that had just found its answer. "You look fine," she said. "You too," he said. "I wasn't fishing for a compliment." "I know, neither was I." She handed him a glass of sparkling water from a passing server. "Stay close. You don't have to perform, just be here." He took the glass. "That I can do." They went in. The room was full of the kind of people Nathan didn't usually stand near, not because they frightened him, but because he didn't have much in common with them and didn't pretend otherwise. Tech executives and investors, and the particular variety of philanthropists who considered their donation a form of branding. They moved through the room in patterns he recognized from his warehouse shifts, clusters that formed and dissolved, the way people gravitating toward anyone who might be useful. Around Ava, it was constant. He watched it happen in real time. The way conversations found her, the way her name was used when people addressed her, the slight difference in body language when someone was working an angle versus actually talking. She was good at all of it. She was good at making each person feel attended to without actually attending to them, which was a skill Nathan had no talent for and observed with something close to professional respect. but she kept coming back to him. Not dramatically. She'd finish a conversation or extract herself gracefully from a circle and find him again, a hand near his arm, or a turned head, or just proximity. And the first time he thought it was the performance. The second time he thought maybe it was also that she was tired of the room and he was a different kind of familiar. By the third time, he just accepted it. A man in his late 60s found them about an hour in. Silver-haired, well-maintained, with the kind of handshake that communicated a long history of handshakes. He looked at Nathan with a specific kind of assessment, not hostile, but measuring. Ava. He kissed her cheek in the European way that was also a greeting and also a statement. You didn't mention you'd be bringing someone. Didn't I? She said it pleasantly. Dad, this is Nathan Reed. Nathan, my father, Richard Kensington. Nathan shook the man's hand. The handshake was firm, dry, deliberate. Nathan gave it back the same way. Richard Kensington's eyes moved between them. Reed, what do you do, Nathan? I run an auto shop, Nathan said. Corner of Dunmore and Fifth. A pause. A mechanic. Yes. Richard smiled the smile of a man who has decided to be gracious. I didn't realize Ava had been... Where did you two meet? Route 9, Nathan said. About a month and a half ago. She had a flat tire. Richard looked at his daughter. The highway story. You didn't mention... Because it wasn't a press release, Dad. Her voice was still pleasant, but there was something underneath it, thin and hard. It was a person I met. Richard looked at Nathan again, and the graciousness went somewhere slightly colder. Not rude. Nathan had to give him that. He was too practiced to be visibly rude. But Nathan had dealt with people who decided what he was worth in the first 30 seconds his whole working life, and he recognized the calculation happening. Well, Richard said, it's good to meet you, Nathan. You too, Nathan said. Richard moved on. Ava let out a breath beside him, slow and controlled. I'm sorry about that. Don't be. He was fine. He was performing fine. I know the difference, Nathan said. It's okay. She looked at him. Does it bother you? He thought about it. The way he looked at me? A little. Not enough to matter. He picked up a second glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. I've been looked at that way before. It doesn't actually do anything to you unless you let it. She was quiet beside him for a moment, and he had the sense she was storing the sentence somewhere. They had dinner at a small table near the back of the venue with two other couples, a data scientist and her husband, who was a high school baseball coach, and a software architect and his wife, who worked at a public library. The coach and the librarian both visibly relaxed when they found out Nathan ran a garage, and the four of them ended up talking for 40 minutes about the specific exhaustions of work that other people don't take seriously. At some point, Nathan looked across the table and found Ava watching him with an expression he couldn't immediately name. What? He said. Nothing. She picked up her fork. You're good at this. Eating dinner? Talking to people. These are easy people to talk to. She looked at the coach and the librarian, who were telling Danny about a time the library's boiler had broken, and they'd called 3 mechanics before finding one who didn't try to charge them double because they assumed the library had a big budget. They are, she said, with something that sounded like actual surprise. Did you think they wouldn't be? I don't usually end up at this end of the table. She said it without self-pity, just as a statement. I usually end up talking to the people who want to talk to me. Those two want to talk to you, Nathan said. They're just also interested in other things. She thought about that for a moment. Then she cut her food and ate it, and didn't say anything else. But the expression on her face had shifted to something quieter and more settled. He got home at midnight. Mrs. Cabrera had put Chloe to bed again, and he paid her in cash and the good coffee again, and stood in the kitchen in his dress clothes, feeling the particular strangeness of the night. He'd been in a room full of people who had more money than he would ever see in his lifetime, wearing shoes that were 3 years old, and he had not once felt like he was drowning. He didn't know if that was a character quality or just stubbornness, but he'd take it. He sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out his phone. There was a message from Ava sent 20 minutes ago. Thank you for tonight. You were better at it than you think. He looked at the message for a moment. He typed back, You underestimate mechanics. He put the phone down and went to check on Chloe, and she was sleeping with Gerald under one arm and her hair spread across the pillow, and her breathing was even. And the monitor he kept on the bedside table showed her heart rate in the normal range, and he stood there for a while before going to bed. The second event was a board dinner, smaller and more difficult. 12 people at a long table in a private dining room, most of them Kensington Technologies shareholders or senior executives, and the entire subtext of the evening was essentially everyone evaluating whether the man sitting next to Ava Kensington was a problem or not. Nathan ate his food and answered questions directly and didn't apologize for what he did for a living. And when a man named Gerald Park, the CFO, thin and precise, with reading glasses he kept taking off and putting back on, said with polished skepticism that it must be interesting, running a small shop, Nathan said yes, it was, and asked Park what the most interesting thing about his own work was. Park seemed briefly startled. Then he talked for 10 minutes about a particular accounting challenge in cross-border tech revenue that Nathan only partially followed, but he followed the parts he could and asked about those. And by the end, Park seemed to have forgotten he'd been skeptical. Ava beside him said nothing. But under the table, her hand found his briefly. Not dramatically, just the press of fingers for a moment, and then it was gone. He didn't make a thing of it. But Chloe met the Houston specialist in the second week of December. Nathan had called and gotten a cancellation appointment. Someone had dropped out of a slot 3 weeks out, and he'd taken it immediately and rearranged his schedule around it without telling Ava. He wasn't going to use the deal for this. The arrangement was for 3 months, and the money was real, but this was a separate thing. This was his. Except that Ava called him the morning of the appointment. She'd asked a week earlier where Chloe's care currently stood, and he'd told her, and he'd given her the Houston doctor's name because she'd asked directly, and he'd learned she asked directly when she wanted information rather than permission. He hadn't expected her to act on it. "I want you to know," she said, "that I called Dr. Mercer's office." He was in the car, Chloe in the back seat, with Gerald in her headphones, not listening. "You didn't have to do that." "I know, but I have a foundation. We fund pediatric cardiac research. I know Mercer's work." A pause. "I asked them to make sure the consult was fully covered under the Foundation's patient assistance program. It should be. The criteria fit. It's not charity, Nathan. It's what the program is for." He kept his eyes on the road. "Ava, I know you're going to push back. I'm trying to figure out how to be grateful without feeling like I've been managed." "Those two things can coexist," she said. "Be both. It's fine." He drove for a moment. "Thank you." "You're welcome." She paused. "Tell Chloe I said good luck." He glanced in the rearview mirror. Chloe was looking out the window with her headphones on, watching the interstate slide by, doing the things she did on long drives where she seemed to be cataloging the world in some private way. "I will," he said. Dr. Mercer was 60, quiet, and enormously competent in the way that people who have spent decades doing one thing very well get to be. She spent 90 minutes with Chloe, ran new scans, reviewed the history Nathan brought in the binder he kept specifically for these appointments, organized by date, color-coded by category. And when she sat down with him afterward, she said the words he'd been waiting 3 years to hear. "She's a surgical candidate," Dr. Mercer said. "Not immediately, but probably within the next 8 to 12 months. The valve gradient has changed enough that intervention will be the right call before she's 10. She folded her hands on the desk. "The procedure is a balloon valvuloplasty. It's minimally invasive. The outcomes at her age are excellent." "Excellent," Nathan repeated. "Over 90% success rate with full recovery. She would likely be off medications within a year post-procedure." He looked at the desk for a moment. "Mr. Reed," the doctor's voice was gentle. "This is good news." "I know." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "I know it is." He pressed the heel of his hand briefly against the edge of the desk, a small pressure, something to hold on to. There's been a lot of waiting, and not knowing whether the waiting was going to end well." "I understand." He looked up. "What do we do next?" She walked him through it. The timeline, the pre-surgical consultations, the program that would cover the costs. When they were done and he went back to the waiting room, Chloe looked up from her book and said, "She took a long time. She was being thorough." "Is that good?" "Yeah." He sat down next to her. She said you're doing well. Chloe looked at him. She was 8, but she read him the way she'd been reading him since she was 5, and she knew the difference between doing well meaning fine and doing well meaning something that had been tight in his chest for years had loosened slightly. Okay, she said. She leaned over and put her head on his arm briefly, the way she did sometimes, without explanation. Then she sat back up and looked at her book again. He sat there beside her in the waiting room of a cardiologist's office in Houston with the low hum of medical equipment and the squeak of shoes on linoleum around them, and he felt the loosening more fully now, and he let it. Well, they flew back to Phoenix that evening. Chloe was asleep before they were off the ground, her head against the window, Gerald on her lap. Nathan sat beside her and looked out at the dark and thought about the months behind him and the months ahead. His phone had a message from Ava. How did it go? He typed, good, really good. She's a surgical candidate. Timeline looks favorable. The reply came back in under a minute. I'm glad. Get some sleep on the plane. He looked at the message for a longer moment than was probably warranted, then put his phone in his pocket. He didn't sleep on the plane, but he sat with something that felt close to stillness, which was different from exhaustion, and he decided it counted. December brought 3 more events. A gallery opening. Ava's foundation funded arts programs in public schools, and the opening was a showcase of student work. Nathan stood in front of a mural painted by a 12-year-old from the South Side and felt something he couldn't name, and Ava stood beside him and said, the kid's name is Maria. She's applied to the arts high school program. She'll get in. How do you know? Because I've seen her portfolio and she's extraordinary. She said it plainly. I'm making sure the committee sees it too. He looked at her. Is that allowed? It's a private foundation. I fund it. The committee gets my opinions when I give them. She paused. Is that wrong? No, he said. I think most people who had that power would use it worse. She didn't respond to that, but she stood a little closer for the rest of the evening. A charity auction which Nathan found actively painful because the things being bid on were absurd, and the amounts were more than he made in a year, and everyone smiled pleasantly through all of it. He managed to keep his expression neutral, which Ava later told him was more than she usually managed, and a holiday dinner at the Kensington family home, which was the one Nathan had been quietly dreading since they'd agreed to the arrangement. The house was in Paradise Valley, large in the way that money decides doesn't need to announce itself, and then announces it anyway, through sheer scale. Richard Kensington was there, and 2 of his brothers, and a collection of cousins and spouses, and a woman Nathan gathered was Ava's mother, though Ava had barely mentioned her, and the dynamic became clear within the first 10 minutes. Her mother was pleasant to everyone equally and deeply committed to the surface of things. There was a man named Carter Voss. Nathan knew the name from Danny's business news updates. Mid-30s, tall, with the easy confidence of someone who had never in his life wondered if he belonged in a room. He arrived late and found Ava near the fireplace, and his greeting was the greeting of a man who considered her a near certainty that had been briefly delayed. Ava? He kissed her cheek. His eyes moved to Nathan. And you are? Nathan Reed, Nathan said. A pause. A smile. The mechanic. That's right. Carter looked him over with the kind of thoroughness that was meant to land as an insult. I've read about you, he said. A bit. I haven't read about you, Nathan said, but I heard about the merger proposal. Carter's smile remained in place. And what did you hear? That it's structured to reduce Ava's operational control within 18 months. He said it the same way he'd explain a brake job. Just the facts, no drama. I'm not a businessman, but that doesn't sound like a partnership. Carter looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Ava, who was watching Nathan with an expression Carter seemed to find confusing. Interesting choice, Carter said to Ava lightly. Yes, she said. He is. Carter moved away. Richard Kensington had been standing close enough to hear. He looked at Nathan with a different calibration than the donor reception, less measuring, more careful. You seem to know a fair amount about the company's business, he said. I know what Ava tells me. And what does she tell you? Nathan looked at him. She tells me the part she wants me to know. He picked up a glass from a passing server. Same as anyone. Richard studied him. The drawing room was full of sound, conversation, music, the click of heels on marble. But in the small bubble around the two of them, it was quiet. "I'll be direct," Richard said. "Please." "I don't know your angle. I've had people look into you, and there's nothing that tells me your angle." He said it like a complaint. "That bothers me more than if they'd found something." "My angle is that I like your daughter," Nathan said. "She's smart and she works hard and she's honest about the things that are wrong with her and doesn't make a performance out of the things that are right." He paused. "She helped my kid get access to a specialist she needed. That's not nothing." Richard held his gaze. "And if there were no arrangement, no benefit to you?" "I don't answer hypotheticals," Nathan said. "I deal with what's in front of me." He excused himself and went to find Ava, who was near the drinks table talking to one of her cousins with the slightly overly managed expression she wore when she was working at being present. When he came up beside her, she looked at him and something in the expression released. "How did you handle my father?" she said quietly. "Fine." "What did you say?" "That I liked you, that you helped Chloe, that I don't answer hypotheticals." She was quiet for a moment. "Those are all true." "I know." He picked up a drink he didn't particularly want. "I don't lie well." It seemed like the cleaner option. She looked at him for a moment longer than usual, and he thought she was going to say something, but then her cousin touched her arm and pulled her back into the conversation, and the moment passed. He stood at the edge of the room and watched the evening happen around him. Later, when the dinner had wound down and the guests were filtering toward the exits, and the Kensington family home was doing its large, quiet, expensive impression of winding down, Nathan stood near the entrance with his jacket over his arm. Ava came to find him, her own coat on, her heels finally exchanged for something flat that she'd pulled from a bag near the door, and she looked 3 inches shorter and considerably more human. "I hate this house," she said, looking back at it. "It's a lot," he agreed. "I grew up here. It was always a lot." She pulled her coat closed. "Carter will call my father tonight. I guarantee it." "What will he say?" "That you're a problem." She looked at him. "You are a bit of a problem. You said the part about the merger out loud, to his face. It's true. He knows it's true. That's why it's a problem." But she didn't sound unhappy about it. There was something looser in her voice than there'd been all evening. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." He walked with her toward the car. Felt right. She looked at him as they walked, and he felt it without turning his head. The specific quality of being looked at by someone who is seeing something they hadn't planned on seeing. He didn't say anything about it. They got in the car and the driver pulled out of the driveway, and the Kensington family house fell away behind them in the dark. And Ava looked out the window, and Nathan looked forward, and the city moved past them both, lit and indifferent, as December pressed its cold weight down on everything. "Nathan," she said. "Yeah." She kept her eyes on the window. "Thank you. For tonight. We had a deal." "I know." A pause. "I'm thanking you anyway." He let the thanks sit between them without deflecting it, which was something he'd gotten better at in the past few weeks, and the car moved through the cold Phoenix night, and somewhere across the city his daughter was asleep under her blanket with a one-eyed rabbit, dreaming whatever 8-year-olds dream, and the arrangement was at its halfway point, and something in the air between them had changed in a way that neither of them was naming yet. The photograph appeared on a Tuesday morning in the second week of January. Nathan was under a Ford F-150 when Danny came into the shop with his phone and crouched down beside the lift without saying anything, which was how Nathan knew it was bad before he saw what it was. The photo was from the holiday dinner at the Kensington house. Someone, a guest, a staff member, someone with access and a reason, had captured a moment Nathan hadn't known was being captured. Him and Ava near the entrance, her heels already switched out for flats, standing close together in the specific way that people stand when they've stopped performing proximity and just exist in it. Her head was slightly tilted toward him. He was looking at her with an expression he didn't recognize on himself, which made it worse somehow. The caption on the gossip site read, "Kensington CEO's mystery man, billionaire slumming it or calculated distraction." He lay under the truck for another moment. Then he slid out. "How bad?" he said. Danny scrolled. "It's on 4 sites so far. 2 business blogs picked it up. One of them is calling you a, he paused, a quote, social climbing opportunist using a vulnerable executive to access her wealth, unquote. Nathan wiped his hands on the rag tucked in his back pocket. Who took it? Nobody's saying, he called Ava. She picked up on the second ring. I saw it, she said. I figured. He walked to the back of the shop, away from Danny and the noise of the street. What do you need from me? Nothing right now. My communications team is handling it. A pause, and in the pause was the specific texture of someone managing 2 things at once. It's not going to stop. You know that. I do. Once it's out there, people will keep looking. They'll find the second job at the warehouse. They'll find the medical bills. Her voice was measured, but underneath it was something tighter. They'll frame all of it as evidence of motive, that you're with me because of what I can provide. People can think what they want, he said. Nathan. She stopped. Then, I'm sorry. I should have been more careful at the dinner. I knew someone in that house was reporting back to my father's people, and I let my guard down. He thought about the moment the photograph had caught. He thought about how it had felt, standing there after the dinner, the coat and the flat shoes, and the way she'd looked at the house when she said she hated it. He thought about the fact that he hadn't been performing anything in that moment. Don't apologize for that, he said. A beat of silence. Okay. What's your communications team going to say? That we're a private couple and that speculation about financial motivation is baseless and insulting. She paused. Which is true. He almost said something. He chose not to. Okay, he said. Let me know what you need. He went back to the truck. No. The story grew the way those things grow. Not in one place, but everywhere simultaneously, each new publication adding a detail or an angle, each angle pulling in a new audience. By Thursday, his name had been run through a business database, and someone had found the loan on the garage. By Friday, they had the warehouse job. By Saturday, a journalist had shown up outside Reed's auto at 9 in the morning with a camera and a smile. Nathan opened the bay door, looked at her, and said, We're not doing this. Mr. Reed, I have 2 bays of work to get through today and a parts delivery coming at noon. He walked back inside. You're welcome to use the waiting area if your car needs service. She did not use the waiting area, but she came back Sunday with a colleague, and Nathan had Chloe with him that day because Mrs. Cabrera had a family thing and the garage was the only option, and he caught the photographer getting a shot of Chloe through the front window when she was sitting at the desk with her homework and Gerald in her juice box, and something cold moved through him. He went outside. Delete it, he said. The photographer started to say something about public spaces and line of sight, and Nathan looked at him with the full weight of a man who had been short on sleep for 3 years and was not interested in legal arguments, and the photographer deleted the photo. Nathan went back inside and sat down across from Chloe at the small desk. Who were those people? She said. Nobody. He picked up her math workbook and looked at where she'd stopped. Are you done with these? She watched him. Dad. Chloe. Are you in trouble? He set the workbook down. She was looking at him with those sharp, patient eyes, and he made himself look back at them and not away. No, he said. Some people are writing things about me that aren't true. It'll settle down. What kinds of things? He thought about how to say it. That I'm spending time with Ava because I want something from her, something material. Chloe turned her juice box in her hands. That's not why. No. Why are you spending time with her? He sat with the question for a moment. It started as a favor, he said. It's become something else, something I haven't figured out yet. Chloe looked at him in the way she had of looking at things she was storing, not processing immediately, but filing. She came to the garage again last week, Chloe said. When I was at school, Danny told me. He said she sat in the waiting area for an hour and didn't need any work done. He hadn't known Danny had told her that. Yeah, he said. She just sat there? She had her phone. But she sat there. Chloe looked at Gerald. She likes you, for real. You don't know that. I'm 8, not oblivious. She picked up her pencil. I'm going to finish my math. He sat at the desk while she worked, and the afternoon moved around them, quiet and ordinary, and he didn't think about the photograph or the journalists or the story building in the outside world, because in here it was just the scratch of a pencil and a juice box, and Gerald and the low sound of Phoenix on a Sunday afternoon. Ava came to Whitfield Street for the first time on a Sunday evening, 3 days after the photographer incident. She'd asked, which he appreciated, not assumed, not shown up. She'd said she wanted to talk in person, without a driver or a venue, and he'd said, fine, come for dinner, and then stood at the stove for 10 minutes wondering how to make that not a bigger thing than it was. He made pasta. Not impressive pasta, just a simple tomato sauce, the kind he made twice a week because Chloe liked it, and it was fast and the ingredients were always in the house. He put it on the table and there was garlic bread from the freezer section and a salad he'd thrown together, and when Ava arrived, she looked at the kitchen table. Small, slightly scarred on one corner where Chloe had once experimented with a craft project involving a glue gun, and sat down like it was nothing. Chloe came out of her room when she heard the door, and her face when she saw Ava went through several stages: surprise, evaluation, something that settled into satisfaction, as if a thing she'd predicted had confirmed itself. You came, she said. Your dad invited me. He makes good pasta, Chloe said, taking this seriously. The garlic bread is from the freezer, but it's still good. Chloe, Nathan said. She should know so she's not confused about what kind of cook you are. Ava looked at Nathan. He could see she was working at not smiling, and she was losing. I appreciate the disclosure, she said to Chloe. They ate dinner at the small table, the three of them, and Chloe talked about a project at school involving a map of the solar system, and the fact that Pluto had been demoted from planetary status in 2006, which she personally felt was unfair, and the fact that her teacher had given them a quiz that she'd gotten 19 out of 20 on because she'd written 9 instead of 8 for the number of planets, which she defended on the grounds that Pluto deserved to still count. It's a principled position, Ava said. It is, Chloe said. Most people just accept what they're told. Nathan watched Ava absorb this from an 8-year-old with complete seriousness, and he watched the way she leaned slightly forward when Chloe talked, the way she asked follow-up questions that were actual questions, rather than adult-performing interest questions. After dinner, he washed up while Ava sat with Chloe at the table, and they looked at the solar system project together. He could hear them from the kitchen, Chloe's precise corrections of Ava's minor factual errors, Ava accepting each correction without performing humility, just taking the information. The sounds of two people who'd found a frequency. He stood at the sink for a moment with his hands under the water, and the kitchen light was warm, and the sounds from the table were ordinary and close, and something in his chest was doing something he didn't look at directly. When Chloe went to bed, after the expected negotiation about timing, which Nathan won on points but Chloe made expensive, he and Ava sat at the kitchen table with what was left of a bottle of red wine he'd opened and mostly forgotten about since October. She's wonderful, Ava said. He poured the wine. I know. I don't mean it as a compliment. I mean it as a fact. She turned the glass. She has a whole interior life. You can see it. She's sorting everything. She's been sorting me since she was 4. Does it bother you? No. He set the bottle down. It helps, actually, having someone around who sees things clearly, even when it's your 8-year-old. She looked at the table, the scar on the corner from the glue gun, the jar of pencils Chloe kept there because she claimed the kitchen table was her best thinking space, the stack of permission slips and school forms that Nathan had been meaning to file and hadn't. I didn't have that, she said. My parents were around, but they weren't present. There's a difference. She said it without apparent bitterness, just the flat delivery she used for things she'd processed a long time ago. I don't think they were bad people. They were just very busy being important and assumed I was fine. Were you? Mostly. She sipped her wine. I was better at being fine than at being actually fine. Those are different skills. He understood that distinction more than he would have guessed. The articles, he said, shifting back to the reason she'd come. Your communications team. What's the current strategy? She made a small sound. They want me to give one interview, control the narrative, humanize the relationship. She turned the glass in her hands again. I don't love it. Humanizing implies that without the interview, it isn't human. What do you want to do? Say nothing. Wait it out. She looked up at him. But my father is using it. He's going to the board with the angle that my personal choices demonstrate instability, that I'm distracted, emotionally compromised. She said the phrase with the precise tone of someone quoting something they find genuinely offensive. Carter Voss sent me flowers this week, with a card that said he hoped I was doing well. He sent flowers. Condolence flowers, essentially, for my poor judgment. She set the glass down. It was exquisitely passive-aggressive. I will give him that. Are you going to do the interview? I don't know. She looked at him. It would involve you. I wouldn't do it without asking first. He sat with that. An interview meant a journalist asking him questions, and whatever he said becoming the public record, and his face and his name and his garage attached to a narrative that someone else was shaping. What would they ask, he said. How we met. What I mean to you. The standard... She stopped. They'd ask about Chloe's condition. Someone already found the medical records context from the Foundation's patient assistance program. They'd ask if that was a conflict of interest. Was it? She looked at him steadily. The patient assistance program has helped 63 children in the past 2 years. Chloe qualified by every criterion before I knew her father. I would make the same call today about any family in her situation. A pause. But no one will write that story. He believed her. He believed her the same way he believed the road was real under his tires. Not because he needed to, but because the evidence was clear. Tell your team no interview, he said. She blinked. Nathan? Not yet. If it gets worse, we revisit. But giving them an interview now is playing the game they set up. He leaned forward slightly. The photograph was bait. The articles are a structure they built. If you go in for an interview, you're walking into a room they designed. He paused. Wait, let it run. The story will move on in 2 weeks unless they have something new to feed it. She was looking at him with the expression he'd come to recognize as her thinking face. Not blank, but turned inward, running the logic. You sound like a communications consultant, she said. I sound like a man who's watched people get baited his whole life. He leaned back. You know those guys who pull into the garage, sure they've got a blown engine and they're furious about it and they want everyone to know? Half the time it's a vacuum hose. They came in swinging and the swing is the whole play. If you swing back, you're in the fight. If you just pop the hood and show them the hose, the fight evaporates. She considered him across the table. A vacuum hose, she repeated, metaphorically. She picked up her wine glass again. Something had shifted in her tray. Not dramatically, but he could see it the way he saw small pressure changes in an engine, the tiny movements that indicate something larger settling. Okay, she said. No interview. They talked for another hour about things that had nothing to do with the story. She told him about the first product Kensington Technologies had built, a data routing tool that most people had never heard of because it lived deep inside infrastructure that other companies ran on. She said she was prouder of it than anything that had come after because it solved a real problem for real engineers, and it had been built by 8 people in 18 months, and every one of them had given up something to do it. He told her about the first car he'd ever fixed completely alone, at 17, in his uncle's driveway. A 1989 Civic that had needed a full-engine rebuild, and he'd done it with a borrowed manual and a set of tools that were mostly the wrong size. He said he'd driven it around the block when it ran and sat in it in the driveway afterward for 40 minutes, just listening to the engine turn over. Why 40 minutes? She asked. I was afraid to turn it off, he said, in case it didn't start again. She laughed. The real one, the caught-off-guard version. And he felt it the way you feel something in a room that's been quiet for a long time when a sound finally moves through it. She left at 10:30, standing at the door with her coat on, and he stood in the doorway in the cold, and she was on the step below, so they were the same height for once. Thank you for dinner, she said, frozen garlic bread and all. Especially the frozen garlic bread. She pulled her coat closed. Nathan. Yeah. She looked at him for a moment with the direct quality that was just her, the way she looked at everything she was deciding how to handle. I want to be honest about something. He waited. This She made a small gesture between them, general and precise at the same time. Whatever this is right now, I know what we agreed to, and I know you're a person who takes what he agrees to seriously. She paused. I just want you to know that I'm aware, that I don't entirely know what I'm doing, and I'm usually a person who knows exactly what I'm doing. He stood in the doorway with the cold coming in and her looking at him from the step. I know, he said. Me too. She nodded once, like that was enough. She turned and walked to the car. He watched the car pull away from the curb and disappear down Whitfield Street, and he stood there in the cold for a while after the taillights were gone. He took Chloe to the park that weekend because the specialist had said activity was fine and important and good for her, and because she'd been asking about the park on Meridian with the climbing structure that had the high platform and the view of the whole neighborhood. He sat on the bench and watched her climb. She was careful in the way she'd learned to be. Not timid, but measured, because her body sometimes sent signals that she'd gotten good at interpreting, and she'd stop when she needed to without being told. It had taken them 2 years to get to this place, where he could watch her climb without every muscle in him ready to move. He wasn't entirely there yet, but he was closer. His phone buzzed. A text from Ava. My father called the board members this morning. Informal conversations, not official action. Yet. He typed back, what does that mean practically? It means he's building something. I just don't know the shape of it yet. He watched Chloe reach the high platform and stand at the edge, looking out at the neighborhood with the expression she got when she was taking the measure of something. We'll figure it out, he typed. You keep saying that. It keeps being true. A pause. Then, I'm coming to the garage tomorrow if that's okay. He smiled at his phone, which was not something he generally did. It's okay. I don't need any work done. I know. He put the phone in his pocket and watched his daughter stand on the high platform in the January light, arms slightly out for balance, looking at the city spread below her like she was deciding what to do with it. The story that broke in the third week of January was different from the photograph. The photograph had been a moment. This was a construction. It ran in a financial news outlet with enough credibility to make the angle stick. Sources close to the Kensington family raised questions about CEO's personal relationship, foundation funds used to benefit boyfriend's child, board concerns over executive judgment. The sourcing was anonymous. The framing was careful and ugly in the way that careful framing usually is. No direct accusation, just the arrangement of facts into a shape that pointed in one direction. It named Chloe's condition. It named the patient assistance program. It included a quote from an unnamed board member suggesting concern about Ava's decision-making process at a critical company juncture. Nathan read it standing at the counter of the garage before Danny arrived. Then he read it again. Then he called Ava. She picked up immediately. I know, she said. The board member, quote, I know who it is. It's Gerald Park. Her voice was flat and even and about 4 degrees colder than usual. He's been in my father's ear for 6 months. I suspected. Now I'm certain. What does this do to your position at the company? It muddies it. That's the point. They don't need to remove me. They need to make the shareholders nervous enough that the Voss merger looks like stability. A pause. Carter Voss gave an interview this morning. He said he has enormous respect for Ava's work and hopes she can focus on the company's future during what must be a difficult time personally. Nathan said nothing for a moment. They planned this, he said. The timing. Yes. The photograph, then the articles, then the board member quote, then Voss positioned as the responsible adult in the room. He leaned on the counter. Your father ran a campaign. He did. Her voice had something in it now that wasn't anger exactly. More like a species of grief, the particular grief of knowing something you'd suspected about a person and having it confirmed. He's been running it since November. I underestimated how far he'd go. He thought about Richard Kensington at the holiday dinner, the careful handshake, the smooth graciousness. The man who'd had people investigate Nathan and been bothered not by what they found, but by the absence of an obvious angle. Ava. He kept his voice level. The article names Chloe. I know. By name. Her condition. The program. He paused. My daughter. I know, Nathan. Her voice went different, quieter, with a weight in it. I am so sorry. I should have. Don't. He wasn't angry at her. He was angry at the shape of it, the specific coldness of using a child as a data point in a political strategy. It's not your fault. It's my world that did this. It is, but you didn't do it. He looked at the garage, the 3 bays, the waiting area with the 4 chairs, and Chloe's drawings on the wall. What do you need to do today? I have a board call in an hour, then a call with my general counsel. Then she stopped. I don't know. I'm still thinking. Call me after the board call. Nathan, call me after, he said. I'll be here. The board call, he found out later, had not gone well. Not catastrophically. Ava held the room, because she always held the room, because she'd built the company and they all knew it. But the questions had been different from usual, more careful. The kind of careful that meant people were making internal calculations and hadn't decided which way to land yet. Gerald Park had said nothing during the call that could be quoted, but his silence had a posture that everyone in the room could read. Ava called Nathan at 2 p.m. They're not moving against me yet, she said. But the ground shifted this morning. Are you going to do the interview? My counsel thinks yes. My gut says no. A pause. You're going to say no again. I'm going to say it depends on the journalist and the terms. Not every interview is the same fight. She was quiet. He could hear the city on her end, which meant she was outside, probably the roof terrace of her building where she went when she needed to think without walls around her. There's something I need to ask you, she said. Okay. Our 3 months, she paused. We're at 9 weeks. There are 3 weeks left. Her voice was careful. I want to know if you want to continue past the end of the arrangement, not the performance, not the structure. I want to know if you want this to keep going as a real thing. He stood in the middle of the garage with the afternoon light coming through the bay door in long strips across the concrete floor. She kept talking, not filling the silence out of nervousness, but because she had more to say. I've been thinking about how to ask this for 2 weeks. I know you're a careful person and you take agreements seriously and you have a daughter and a business and a full life that doesn't need my particular complications added to it. A pause. But I also know that what's been happening between us isn't the thing we agreed to. And I think you know that too. And I would rather say it out loud and have you tell me I'm wrong than keep not saying it. He sat down on the hood of a Subaru waiting for its alignment. You're not wrong, he said. She said nothing. I don't know how to do this, Ava. I don't know how to be with someone in your world. I don't know the rules and I don't have the vocabulary, and half the things your life involves are things I've never touched. He paused. But I'm not pretending anymore. Haven't been for a while. Neither have I. He looked at the bay door, at the strip of afternoon coming through it. The article named Chloe, he said. I know. If this keeps going, more things like that will happen. More people looking at her. More. He stopped. She's not a prop. She's my kid. I know that. Her voice was quiet and absolutely certain. I would never let her be used that way. Whatever I have to do to ensure that. He believed her. Again, without needing to work at it. Okay, he said. A beat. Okay, which part? Okay, I'm not walking away at the 3-month mark. He looked at the light on the concrete. I'm not good at this either. I'll screw it up sometimes. I don't have the kind of life that fits neatly into what yours is. I'm not asking for neat, she said. I'm not even sure I'd trust neat. He could hear in her voice something that had been tightly held for a long time, releasing a small amount of its tension. He recognized it because he'd felt something similar that morning in Houston, in the waiting room, when Chloe had leaned her head on his arm. I should get back to work, he said. I know. Me too. A pause. Nathan, thank you. For what? For not making me ask twice? He almost said something. Instead, he said, talk tonight. Talk tonight, she agreed. He set his phone on the Subaru's hood and sat for another moment in the garage with the light coming in and the sound of Phoenix outside and the afternoon moving over everything the way afternoons do. Indifferently, steadily, giving no particular weight to the moments inside it. He pressed the back of his wrist briefly to his mouth and looked at the ceiling. Then he got up and went back to work. He was 2 hours into a brake job on a 2019 Camry when his phone lit up on the toolbox with a notification from a news aggregator he'd never removed. The headline was from the same financial outlet that had run the article that morning. Kensington Tech CEO under pressure as second investor group signals support for Voss merger. Source says board vote possible within weeks. He read it twice. Then he set the phone face down and finished the brakes. Outside, the January afternoon went pale and then dark, and the city moved through its ordinary hours. And somewhere in a high-rise office, Ava Kensington was reading the same headline and deciding what to do about it. And somewhere on Whitfield Street, a one-eyed rabbit sat on a kitchen counter waiting for the house to fill back up with people, and the world kept turning its slow turn through all of it, giving nothing away about what was coming. The board vote was scheduled for February 14th. Nathan found out the way he found out most things about Ava's professional world. Not from Ava directly, but from the space around her. The financial news site ran the announcement on a Wednesday morning, and Danny saw it first and said nothing, just left his phone on Nathan's toolbox with the screen up, and Nathan read it while he was waiting for an alignment rack to calibrate. Kensington Technologies Board to hold special session February 14th to consider strategic direction amid ongoing shareholder concerns. The session is expected to include a vote on the proposed merger with Voss Group. He read it twice. Then he called her. She picked up, and he could tell by the quality of her silence that she'd been waiting for him to call. February 14th, he said. They moved it up. I found out last night. A pause. My father got Park and 2 other board members to call for an emergency session. They have enough signatures to force it. Can they override you? On a merger? Yes. I hold 38%. The family block is 22%. If enough independent shareholders side with them, she stopped. It's close. I've been working the phones for 3 weeks trying to secure commitments, but people are nervous, and nervous people move toward what looks like stability. And Carter Voss looks like stability. Carter Voss looks like $40 billion, and a clean public image, and a merger that would push Kensington stock up 12% in the short term. Her voice was dry and precise and tired. Stability is relative. He was outside the shop, standing in the February cold with his jacket open because he'd come out fast, and the sky was the flat white of a Phoenix winter morning that couldn't decide whether to be cold or not. What do you need? He said. I need to get through the next 3 weeks. A pause. I need to know that what's happening between us isn't something I've manufactured because everything else is falling apart. He considered that for a moment. She was doing the thing she did when she was most honest, which was say the difficult thing out loud rather than let it stay internal and grow distorted. It's not, he said. How are you sure? Because if you'd manufactured it, it would look different. It would be easier. He looked at the street. Nothing about you is easy, Ava. A short sound that was almost a laugh. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. Take it how you want. She was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. Okay. The thing that happened next, Nathan had not anticipated. He should have. Looking back, the shape of it was clear. The campaign his family had been running had been systematic and patient and careful, and the photograph and the articles and the board positioning had all been moves in a sequence. He'd seen the sequence. He just hadn't anticipated the final move because it required a specific kind of coldness that he'd still been giving the Kensington family too much credit not to have. The piece ran on a Thursday afternoon on the same financial outlet. This time, it wasn't anonymous sources. This time, it was a quote from Richard Kensington himself. I have no personal animosity toward Mr. Reed, but the facts are what they are. My daughter is under significant professional pressure, and the man she has chosen to involve herself with has a direct financial interest in her decisions. The Foundation's assistance to his child, the public association that insulates him from scrutiny. These are not the choices of a CEO operating with clear judgment. The board must consider whether the company's interests are being properly prioritized. There was more. There was a sidebar, compiled by someone with access to his financial records, that laid out, accurately and in cold detail, the medical bills, The warehouse job? The business loan? The gap between what he earned and what Chloe's care cost? The sidebar's headline was, "The Numbers Behind the Relationship." Nathan sat at the kitchen table at Whitfield Street that evening and read the full piece on his phone while Chloe was in her room. He read it slowly, the way he read repair manuals, checking each line for what it said and what it implied. Then he put the phone face down on the table and sat with his hands flat on the surface. The numbers were accurate, every one of them. The piece had found the specific dollar amount of Chloe's most recent cardiology consultation, the one in Houston, and placed it in a chart next to Nathan's annual garage revenue and his warehouse hourly wage. And the math spoke the way math does, without needing to say anything explicit. His phone lit up. Ava calling. He let it ring. It rang again. He let it ring again. The third call he picked up. "I've been trying," she started. "I know. Nathan, it's my father's people who leaked the financial records. I'm having my counsel look at whether there's a legal angle. It doesn't matter. It matters enormously. They violated..." "Ava." He kept his voice level. "Stop." She stopped. He sat at the table. The jar of pencils was in front of him, and the stack of school forms, and the ceramic bowl with the loose change, and the hair ties. "The piece isn't wrong," he said. It's framed badly, but the numbers are real. I have more medical debt than annual revenue. I took money from your foundation's program. I agreed to a paid arrangement with you." He said each thing clearly. "I knew all of those things were true. I just didn't think about how they'd look assembled in a row. People's lives don't deserve to be assembled in a row by someone with an agenda. No, they don't." He pressed his thumb against the edge of the ceramic bowl. "But they can be." And they were. Silence. "What are you saying?" Her voice was careful. He looked at the kitchen. He thought about the holiday dinner and the gallery and Manny's diner and the garage in Houston. He thought about the roof terrace where she went to think, and the flat shoes at the end of the evening, and the real laugh, and the fraction homework, and the way she'd looked at Chloe's drawings on the wall the very first time. He thought about the board vote in 3 weeks. "The campaign your father ran," he said. "It's working. Not on you. You won't fold. But on the shareholders who are on the fence." He paused. "As long as I'm in the picture, your father has a lever. Every time a shareholder hesitates, he can point at me and say, 'Distracted CEO, compromised judgment.' It doesn't have to be true to be effective." She didn't answer. He could feel her on the other end of the call, could feel the quality of her silence, which was not agreement but was not refusal either. She was too honest to say he was wrong. "I'm not going to be the reason you lose your company," he said. "Nathan, I'm not walking away from you because I want to. I'm telling you what I think is true." He stopped, corrected himself. "I'm telling you what I think I have to do. Don't make that decision for me." Her voice went sharp, the sharpest he'd ever heard it. "That is not your decision to make. The board vote is in 3 weeks. I don't care about the board vote." "Yes, you do. Not more than..." She stopped herself. The silence between them was the loudest silence there had been. "Get through the vote," he said. "After the vote, we talk. Whatever happens. And if I lose the vote, then we talk sooner." "Nathan, get through the vote, Ava." He held the call for another moment. He could hear her breathing, not steadily but not broken either. She was holding herself in the way she held herself in rooms she hated, the controlled stillness. "This is you being a good person," she said. "I'm aware of that. I'm also aware that I want to argue with you for the next 2 hours. You can do both things." "You're infuriating," she said. It wasn't quite an insult. "I know." He picked up the ceramic bowl and set it down again. Ava, I'm not gone. I'm just out of the frame for now." She didn't say anything for a long time. 3 weeks, she finally said. 3 weeks. The call ended. He sat at the table until he heard Chloe come out of her room, and then he put his phone in his pocket and stood up and made the expression that meant things were fine, which was not a lie so much as a postponement, and he made her a snack and they watched TV for an hour, and the evening moved through its ordinary phases, and he thought about almost nothing. The first week he kept the warehouse shifts and worked the garage and told Danny nothing except that things were complicated, and Danny, who was 24 and not unobservant, said okay and didn't push. Chloe asked about Ava twice. The first time he said she was busy with work. The second time, Chloe looked at him for a long moment and said, "Did you do something stupid?" And he said no, and she said, "Did she?" And he said no, and Chloe said, then why isn't she coming around? And he said it was complicated, and Chloe said, with the air of someone being extremely patient, "That's not an answer, that's a category." He didn't have a better answer, so he said nothing, and Chloe went back to her homework with the expression of a person filing a grievance for future reference. He didn't call Ava, she didn't call him. He watched the financial news through Danny's secondhand reports and his own late-night reading, tracking the board votes approach the way you track weather moving in from the west. Carter Voss gave 2 more interviews. Both were measured and professional. Both positioned him as a stabilizing force. One of them included a line about how he'd always admired Ava's talent and hoped she could navigate this period with the focus the company deserved, which was a sentence so carefully constructed in its condescension that Nathan read it 3 times just to take its full measure. The second week was harder. Not dramatically, nothing broke. He went to work and came home and made dinner and put Chloe to bed and lay in the dark and tracked the feeling in his chest, which was not grief exactly, but was adjacent to it. The particular ache of having chosen to step back from something that mattered, and knowing the choice was right and still not feeling good about it. He was at the warehouse on a Thursday night, moving pallet jacks through the east loading bay, when his phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. "This is Eleanor Reyes. I'm Ava's chief of staff. She doesn't know I'm texting. I think you should know she hasn't slept more than 4 hours in 6 days. She's running on bad coffee and board prep decks. She's holding it together, but she's not okay. I'm not asking you to do anything. I just thought you should know." He stood in the warehouse with the text open. He typed back, "Thank you for telling me." He put the phone in his pocket and finished the shift. On the drive home at midnight, he thought about Ava on the roof terrace of her building with bad coffee and a board prep deck and 3 weeks of her own silence the way he had 3 weeks of his. He thought about Eleanor Reyes texting a stranger at 11 p.m. because she was worried about her boss. He thought about the specific loneliness of being competent enough that people assumed you were fine. He drove home and went to bed and didn't call. Chloe's emergency happened on a Friday morning, the last day of the second week. It wasn't dramatic in the way emergencies are in movies. No sudden collapse, no clear moment of crisis. It started the way it always started when it was something real. She woke up tired in a specific way, and she ate breakfast without complaining about anything, which Nathan had learned years ago was the sign to watch for. When Chloe wasn't complaining, something was off. By 7:30, she was pale, and her lips had taken on the faint color change that he could read now the way a sailor reads water. He called Dr. Mercer's answering service at 7:45 while simultaneously calling Danny to cancel the day. The Phoenix Children's Cardiac Unit admitted her by 9. The attending physician on duty was a young man named Dr. Okafor, who had the particular calmness of someone trained to have it rather than born with it, and Nathan appreciated that because it left room for his own, less managed version. Dr. Okafor explained that Chloe's valve gradient had shifted significantly, faster than the projected timeline, and that they were looking at acute stenosis pressure that needed to be monitored closely and potentially addressed sooner than the Houston timeline. "How soon is sooner?" Nathan said. "We want to watch her through the weekend. If the gradient holds where it is, we're stable, and we can discuss revised planning with Dr. Mercer. If it increases," Dr. Okafor paused carefully, "we would need to act." Nathan sat by Chloe's bed for the rest of the morning. She was on monitors and an IV drip, and she had Gerald on the pillow beside her, and she was reading a book about deep-sea creatures that she'd checked out from the school library. She was not performing being fine. She was actually reading about deep-sea creatures because she found them genuinely interesting, which was its own kind of courage that Nathan had no idea what to do with except witness it. At noon, she looked up from her book. "Is Ava coming?" she said. He didn't answer immediately. "I'm not asking you to call her," Chloe said. "I'm asking if she's coming." "She doesn't know," he said. Chloe looked at him steadily. She held Gerald under one arm and looked at her father with the full force of her 8 years of knowing him. "You should tell her," she said. "Not for me. I'm fine." She said it in the voice that meant she knew she was not entirely fine but was working on it. Tell her for you, because you look like you did the thing you do where you decide to be alone about something. I'm not alone. I'm here. That's not what I mean, and you know it. He looked at his daughter in a hospital bed with monitoring cables and a one-eyed rabbit and a book about the deep ocean, and he thought about all the ways he had tried to carry things so she wouldn't have to see him carry them, and how thoroughly she had always seen anyway. I'll think about it, he said. You'll think about it, and then you'll decide not to, which is the same as not doing it. She turned a page. She should know, Dad. He sat with that for a while. At 2 p.m, while Chloe was napping, he walked to the small family waiting area down the hall and sat in a chair by the window and looked at the Phoenix skyline and thought about the thing he'd spent 2 weeks telling himself was the right choice. The board vote was still a week away. He'd said 3 weeks. He'd meant it. But Chloe was in a hospital bed, and she'd asked, and there were things that mattered more than the geometry of a right decision. He called. She picked up in one ring. Nathan. Just his name, but with the whole 2 weeks folded into it. Chloe's in the hospital, he said. Phoenix Children's Cardiac Unit. She's stable, but her timeline moved up. Silence. I'm on my way, she said. You don't have to. I'm on my way. She was there in 40 minutes. She came in through the unit door with her coat still on and her phone in her hand and found Nathan in the hallway outside Chloe's room. She looked at him the way she looked at problems she was deciding how to solve, and then she looked at him differently. The way she'd looked at the photograph, the way that had nothing to do with solving anything. She didn't say anything. She put her hand on his arm briefly, a pressure and a release, and then she looked through the window at Chloe. She's reading, Ava said. Deep sea creatures. Of course she is. Her voice was quiet. He looked at her profile. The tension in her jaw that was 2 weeks of board prep and bad coffee and not sleeping. The coat she hadn't taken off, the phone she was still holding, like she might need to answer it. I'll go in, she said. She'll want that. Ava pushed the door open and Nathan stayed in the hall. He watched through the window. Chloe looked up from her book and her face moved through the same stages it always did. Surprise, evaluation, the settling into something warmer. Ava sat in the chair beside the bed and took the book when Chloe offered it and looked at whatever page they'd landed on. And Chloe leaned over to point at something, and Ava nodded, and they sat together like that, his daughter and this woman who had appeared in both their lives on a stormy October highway. And something in the hallway where Nathan was standing rearranged itself into a shape he hadn't planned for and couldn't name precisely and didn't try to. He went and got 2 coffees from the family lounge down the hall. When he came back, Ava was still in the room, and Chloe had moved the book to show her a specific page, and Gerald had been introduced onto Ava's lap. He waited in the hall. At 3:30, Dr. Okafor came by with an update. The gradient was holding, not worsening. They'd likely know more by Sunday. The immediate crisis pressure had eased slightly. Ava came out of the room when she saw the doctor, and she listened to the update with her arms crossed and her focus the complete kind, asking 2 specific questions about the pressure differential readings that Dr. Okafor answered with visible respect, because the questions were precise and indicated someone who had been reading the literature. When the doctor left, Nathan looked at her. You read her file, he said. Eleanor got it from Dr. Mercer's office. She said it simply. I wanted to understand what we were looking at. We, he said. She met his eyes. Yes. We. He looked at his coffee cup. Ava, the board vote is next week. I know when the board vote is. You should be. I'm where I need to be. Your company, Nathan. Her voice was quiet and completely certain. My company has been there for 8 years and will be there next week. Your daughter is in that room right now. She paused. Tell me where you want me to be. He looked at the window, at Chloe inside with her book and her rabbit and the monitors. Here, he said. I want you here. She sat down in the chair beside him in the hallway. He sat in the other. They were quiet for a while, and the hospital moved around them. The squeak of shoes, the distant sound of the intercom, the low mechanical hum of the unit, and they sat in it together, not performing anything, not managing anything, just present in the difficult, ordinary way of people who have decided to be somewhere. "I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to disappear," she said. "I chose that. You chose it because you were trying to protect me." She looked at the middle distance. "I understand the instinct. I do it too. I protect by controlling. You protect by removing yourself." She paused. "Neither of us is good at asking for help." "No," he agreed. "We should probably work on that." "Probably." She looked at him. "Is that an agreement?" "It's a start." Something in her face softened in a way that wasn't weakness, but was the opposite of performance. He was close enough to see it, and she let him see it, which was itself a thing. Chloe was in the hospital through Sunday. The gradient stabilized by Saturday afternoon, and Dr. Okafor said the planned timeline with Dr. Mercer could likely resume, revised to a 6-month window rather than 8. Not emergency surgery. A managed path, faster than before, with better preparation. Nathan slept in the family waiting room Friday and Saturday nights. Danny handled the shop. Mrs. Cabrera brought food on Saturday afternoon that Nathan didn't ask for and she didn't offer, just delivered. A container of something hot and a note that said, "Don't say anything, just eat." Ava came both days. She didn't stay overnight. Nathan told her not to, and this time she didn't argue, because he'd said it without the subtext of stepping back, just the practical observation that she had a board vote in 7 days and she needed to sleep. She came in the morning, sat with Chloe, brought good coffee from a place she knew, and left by evening. Chloe, from her hospital bed, watched the two of them in the hallway through the window with the steady patience of a child doing long observation and coming to conclusions. On Saturday afternoon, while Nathan was refilling his coffee, Ava sat with Chloe alone, and Chloe said, without preamble, "Are you going to stay?" Ava looked at her. "At the hospital." "No." Chloe gave her the look she reserved for adults being deliberately obtuse. "Here, with us." Ava was quiet for a moment. "I want to," she said. "But there are some things I need to get through first." Chloe considered this. She turned Gerald over in her hands the way she did when she was processing. "Dad never brings anyone here," she said. "I mean here, to this part of our life, the hospital part." She looked up. "He keeps people away from it because he thinks it'll scare them off." "I know." "He didn't keep you away." Ava met the 8-year-old's eyes and thought about the 2 weeks and the phoneless silence and the board vote and the campaign and the article with the numbers in a row. "He tried," she said. Chloe seemed to find this acceptable. She opened her book. "Good," she said. "Because I already told Mrs. Cabrera about you, and she wants to meet you, and she's going to be annoyed if she went to that trouble for nothing." Chloe came home Sunday afternoon. Nathan drove her, and she sat in the back seat with Gerald and looked out the window at the city sliding past. And when they pulled onto Whitfield Street, she made a sound, small, quiet, the sound of someone who has been somewhere difficult and is now in the right place. He carried her inside, which she was slightly too old to accept without protest, and accepted anyway, and he put her on the couch and got her a blanket and put on the nature documentary she liked about the ocean. He sat in the chair beside the couch and watched her watch the TV. "She's going to be at the vote this week," Chloe said, without looking away from the screen. "I know. You should watch it." "I'll be at the garage." "Watch it from the garage." She pulled the blanket up. "You should see it." He didn't say anything. "Dad," she glanced at him. "She's going to need to know someone was watching." He looked at his daughter on the couch with her one-eyed rabbit and her blanket and her deep certainty about things that he couldn't always see clearly from where he stood. "Okay," he said. "I'll watch." She turned back to the documentary. Outside, the February afternoon was going golden and cold, and the street was quiet except for a car passing and the distant bark of a dog, and the house on Whitfield Street settled around them with its small, familiar sounds, and Nathan Reed sat in his chair beside his daughter and breathed and let the evening come. The board vote was on a Thursday at 10 in the morning. Nathan was at the garage when it started. He had Danny running the Camry that had come in that morning, and he was doing an oil change on a Mazda belonging to a college student named Kim, who had come in 3 times in the past year, and each time had a little less money and a little more car trouble. And he'd started giving her the student discount he'd invented specifically for her and never mentioned by name. At 10:15, he got his phone out and pulled up the Kensington Technologies investor portal, which he'd set up an account on 2 weeks ago. The stream was already running. A conference room, a long table, 12 people. Ava at the head of the table in a dark jacket, her hair back, her face in the boardroom mode he recognized. Controlled, precise, the version of her that had no edges showing. He propped the phone against the oil drain pan and kept working. He couldn't hear everything. Brum. The garage had its own sounds, but he could see. He watched Ava make her case for the next 40 minutes. He couldn't follow every term, and he didn't try to. He followed the shape of it, the way she moved through her material, the way she addressed each board member directly when she answered questions, the way she didn't perform certainty but communicated it anyway through the specific density of her preparation. Gerald Park asked a question that Nathan could see, from body language alone, was designed to destabilize. Ava answered it in about 90 seconds, referencing 2 documents he couldn't see but that she clearly knew down to the page number. Carter Voss was not at the table, but his proxy was. A lawyer who raised 2 points that got 5 minutes of discussion. At 11:40, Richard Kensington said something from the far end of the table that made 3 board members look at Ava. She looked back. She spoke for 4 minutes. Nathan watched her face on the small phone screen. The particular expression she had when she was saying what she actually believed rather than what the room wanted to hear. He'd seen that expression in the garage and at Manny's diner and in the hospital hallway and in the kitchen on Whitfield Street, and it was the same here, in this boardroom with 12 people and a vote that could take her company away from her. At noon, the vote was called. 8-4, in her favor. Nathan set his wrench down. He picked up his phone and typed, 8-4. I was watching. He put the phone down and finished the oil change. 3 minutes later, his phone lit up. I know. Eleanor saw the portal log in. I didn't tell her to look, but I also didn't tell her not to. A pause. Then, thank you for watching. He typed back, you didn't need me to. Her reply, no, but I wanted you to. He put the phone in his pocket. Kim was at the counter paying for her oil change, and he ran the card and told her the student discount had applied, and she gave him the look she always gave him when he said that, which was simultaneous gratitude and suspicion, and he said, have a good semester, and she left. Danny appeared from under the Silverado. Well? 8-4. Danny's face split into a grin. Ha! He went back under the truck. Carter Voss can go find someone else's company to buy. Nathan stood at the counter with his phone in his pocket. Outside, February moved through its pale middle hours, and the street was ordinary, and the garage was ordinary, and Whitfield Street was 12 minutes away where Chloe was at school and Mrs. Cabrera was next door and Gerald was waiting on the kitchen counter. And somewhere downtown, Ava Kensington had just kept her company, and the long campaign against her had failed on a Thursday morning in a conference room, and all of it was real, and none of it was finished, and the next thing was just the next thing. He picked up the service sheet for the next job. He went back to work. The week after the board vote was quiet in the way that follows something loud. Nathan noticed it the way you notice a sound stopping. Not the silence itself, but the absence of what had been filling the air for months. The financial news stopped running his name. The photographer who had staked out the garage twice in January didn't come back. Danny stopped leaving his phone on the toolbox with articles queued up. The world moved on to whatever came next, the way it always did, with the specific indifference of news cycles toward the people they'd briefly used. He and Ava talked every night that week. Not long calls. She was restructuring the board agreement, dealing with Gerald Park's formal resignation, managing the internal communications that followed a vote like that one. But every night, somewhere between 9 and 10, his phone would ring and he'd sit at the kitchen table or on the back step depending on the weather, and they'd talk for 30 or 40 minutes about the day's specifics and then about other things, and the other things were the part that mattered. Chloe asked on Wednesday if things were better now. He said yes. She said, so she's coming back to the garage? He said probably more than the garage. Chloe absorbed this. Good, she said, because Gerald needs to meet her properly. The hospital doesn't count. He was stressed. Nathan looked at the stuffed rabbit on the counter. Gerald was stressed. He gets anxious in medical settings. She picked up Gerald and tucked him under her arm. We've talked about it. He let that go without comment, which was usually the right call with Chloe. Ava came to Whitfield Street on Saturday, not for anything specific, not a planned event or a necessary conversation. She just came, in the early afternoon, with a bag that had coffee from the good place and something Chloe had mentioned once liking, a kind of pastry from a Vietnamese bakery on the east side that Ava had apparently tracked down through some combination of determination and the resources of a billion-dollar company applied to a completely minor problem. Chloe received the pastry with the solemnity of someone accepting something they'd been hoping for but hadn't asked about. They spent the afternoon the way ordinary Saturday afternoons get spent. The nature documentary that Chloe had been working through. A walk around the block when the afternoon got warm enough, Chloe asking Ava increasingly specific questions about how computers worked at the level she worked with them, and Ava answering each question with the same directness she'd applied to the fractions months ago. Not performing patience, just actually interested in explaining. Nathan watched it from the edges, doing the small Saturday things, laundry, the grocery list, the repair he'd been putting off on a kitchen cabinet that had been sticking since October. He was in the kitchen when Ava came in to refill her coffee, and she leaned against the counter and they were close in the way that a small kitchen makes you close, and she looked at him with the expression that had been building in her since February 14th. I need to tell you something, she said. He closed the cabinet. Okay. I've been talking to my legal team. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. About my father. The financial records that were leaked to the press. There's a clear breach of fiduciary duty argument. My counsel is confident. Are you going to pursue it? She looked at the cup. I don't know yet. A pause. Part of me wants to. Not for the money, because that's not the point. But because what he did, using Chloe's medical records as ammunition, that can't just sit there without consequence. People deserve to know that was wrong. It was wrong, Nathan said. I know. I'm just... She stopped. He's my father, and that doesn't change what he did, and it also doesn't disappear. She looked up at him. I'm trying to hold both of those things at once and figure out what to do with them. He thought about that for a moment. He thought about what it was to be someone's child and have them do something that showed you clearly who they were when it mattered, and to have to live with that knowledge going forward. You don't have to decide today, he said. I know. And whatever you decide, you don't have to explain it to anyone who wasn't in the room. She looked at him. That's very... I mean it practically. Not as advice, just, it's your call. All of it. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, Chloe's voice came through the window, talking to herself or to Gerald about something she'd seen on the documentary. I'm going to do the shareholder meeting address in April, Ava said. It's an annual thing. But this year, I want to do it differently. She paused. I want to announce the foundation expansion, pediatric cardiac care specifically, not just research, but direct access programs, families who can't afford the system the way it exists. She looked at the cup. I've been thinking about it since Houston, since the patient assistance program, since Chloe. He didn't say anything. It won't fix the system, I know that, but it can change the geometry of it for families who are currently in the same position you've been in. She looked up at him. I want your input on how it's structured, not as a courtesy, because you know what that looks like from the inside, and I don't. And if I build it without that perspective, it'll be another well-funded program that misses the point. He looked at her for a long moment. Okay, he said. Okay, you'll help? Okay, I'll help. She exhaled, a small controlled thing that was nonetheless real. He recognized it as the release she allowed herself when something she'd been carrying settled. Also, she said, I told my communications team to release a statement about what my father did, about the records and the campaign. Not legal action, just the facts, attributed, on record. She met his eyes. I want it known. What was done to you? What was done to Chloe? He was quiet for a moment. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know. She set her cup down. I did it anyway. He looked at the kitchen counter, the bowl with the coins and the hair ties, the jar of pencils, the cabinet he'd just fixed. This small house that held everything that mattered to him, and this woman who had walked into the garage on a Tuesday in November and sat in the waiting area for no good mechanical reason and asked Chloe about fractions. Ava, he said. She looked at him. He picked up her coffee cup and put it back in her hands and said, "Come back outside. Chloe is going to want to tell you about the deep-sea fish she found." She took the cup. The corner of her mouth moved. "There's always a new fish. Every week there's a new fish, and..." They went back outside. Chloe's surgery was scheduled for April 2nd. Dr. Mercer flew in from Houston. The procedure would be done at Phoenix Children's in the same cardiac unit where Chloe had spent that February weekend on monitors, in the same building where Nathan had sat in the family waiting room and eaten Mrs. Cabrera's food and watched his daughter read about the deep ocean. In the weeks leading up to it, the house on Whitfield Street went through its own kind of preparation. Chloe was matter-of-fact about the surgery in the way she was matter-of-fact about most things that involved her heart. Not dismissive, but practical, as if she'd long since decided that being afraid of it didn't change it, and understanding it gave her more than fear did. She asked Dr. Mercer 3 specific questions at the pre-surgical consultation that the doctor answered in full, without the softening adults sometimes apply to children, and Chloe received the answers and filed them and moved on. Nathan did not move on as easily. He went through his own private reckoning in the weeks before. The late nights, the inventory of everything he stood to lose, the specific way that fear lives in a parent's body when the threat is to their child. He was careful about it around Chloe because she was watching, and he was less careful about it alone. And there were nights he sat on the back step in the March air and felt the full weight of it and let himself feel it because the alternative was carrying it into everything else. Ava came on those nights sometimes. Not all of them. She had her own work in her own city, but sometimes she was there, on the back step with him, not filling the silence with reassurance or management, just there. He'd learned to let that be enough. "You don't have to," he started one evening. "I know," she said. "I'm here." He looked at the dark yard. "I've been doing this alone for so long that having someone else here feels strange, like I'm waiting for the catch." "I know. That's not about you. I know that too." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. She was always doing something with her hands when she was thinking, he'd noticed. It was the ring or the cup or the edge of whatever she was holding. "I'm not easy to be with, Nathan. I'm in my head too much. I fix things that might not need fixing. I have strong opinions about things that aren't my business. I'll be wrong sometimes, and I'll take too long to admit it." She paused. "I'm telling you this now so you can't say I didn't warn you. I've noticed all of those things already. And?" He looked at the yard. "And I'm still here." She leaned back against the step behind her. "That's a low bar." "It's a real one." He looked at her. "You know what's rare? Someone who tells you who they are. Most people wait for you to find out." She held his gaze for a moment, then she looked back at the yard. "I learned that from watching you," she said. He didn't answer, because it didn't need one. Tzak. April 2nd came. The surgery was 4 hours. Nathan sat in the family waiting room with Mrs. Cabrera, who had insisted, and Danny, who had closed the shop without being asked, and Ava, who had rescheduled 2 meetings and a conference call and arrived at 7 in the morning with good coffee for everyone, including Mrs. Cabrera, which Mrs. Cabrera accepted with the gracious suspicion of a woman who was reserving final judgment but was inclined favorably. Dr. Mercer came out at 2:15. She said it went well. Said the valve responded exactly as projected. Said Chloe was in recovery and would be awake within the hour and asking questions shortly after that, which she said with the faint smile of someone who had already assessed who she was dealing with. Nathan stood in the middle of the waiting room and breathed. Mrs. Cabrera put her hand briefly on his arm, patted it twice, and said something in Spanish that he understood as broadly positive and deeply felt. Danny said, "Yeah," in the voice he used when he had more to say and couldn't find it. Ava was beside Nathan, and she didn't say anything at all, just stood close, and he felt her presence the way you feel something solid when you're looking for footing. He pressed the heel of his hand to his mouth for a moment. Then he looked up. "I want to see her," he said. Chloe woke up at 3 and was annoyed by the IV by 3:10 and had asked 2 questions about the procedure by 3:20 and declared the hospital food unacceptable by 3:30, which Dr. Mercer said was an excellent sign. When Ava came in, Chloe looked at her from the bed with the slightly drowsy expression of a child emerging from anesthesia and said, "You came." "I've been here since 7, Ava said. Chloe considered this. "Gerald was worried," she said. Gerald was in the bag Nathan had brought, and she located him and put him on the pillow with the practiced authority of long habit. "Gerald doesn't need to worry," Ava said. "He worries anyway. It's his thing." She looked at Ava. "Are you staying?" "For a while, yes. I mean, generally." Chloe looked at her with the directness that 8-year-olds are still young enough to use without apology. "Because I told Mrs. Cabrera about you, and she made me promise to find out when you were coming to dinner properly. She wants to make food." Ava glanced at Nathan, who was leaning in the doorway with his arms crossed, and an expression she could read now well enough to know was the one he used when Chloe was being herself, and he had given up trying to moderate it. "Tell Mrs. Cabrera I'd like that," Ava said. Chloe seemed satisfied. She adjusted Gerald's position, checked his ear, and looked at the ceiling. "Dad?" "Yeah." "You should say something." "To who?" She gave him the look. "To her." She gestured vaguely at Ava. "The big thing. The thing you've been not saying." "Chloe, I'm in a hospital bed. I had surgery. I get to say things." She looked at the ceiling with the complete serenity of someone who had deployed an unanswerable argument and knew it. Nathan stood in the doorway. He looked at his daughter in the hospital bed, coming out of anesthesia and still organizing the people in her life with her customary efficiency. He looked at Ava, who was looking at Chloe with an expression that was somewhere between amazed and completely undone. He moved from the doorway to the chair beside the bed. "She's right," he said. "I've been not saying it." Ava turned to look at him. "I love you," he said. He said it the way he said things he meant, plainly, directly, without decoration. "I know what that means and what it doesn't mean, and I'm not saying it to simplify anything. I'm saying it because it's true, and because Chloe is going to make my life extremely difficult if I don't." He paused. "Also because it's true." Ava looked at him for a moment that stretched. Then she said, "You said that twice." "I know." "I love you too," she said. She said it in her voice, which was the voice that didn't perform anything. "I've been not saying it since January. Maybe before January. I'm not entirely sure when it started." "October," Chloe said from the bed. "On the highway. But you didn't know it yet." They both looked at her. "I read a lot," she said. "I know how these things work." The shareholder meeting was the first Friday in May, and it was the kind of event that got covered because Ava Kensington made it the kind of event that got covered. She'd chosen the format carefully. Not an investor call, not a press conference, but an open meeting that was streamed publicly, held in the main atrium of the Kensington Technologies campus, with shareholders and employees and journalists all in the same room. Nathan watched it from the garage, same as the board vote. Phone propped on the toolbox, streaming the feed while he worked through a brake job on a 2020 Civic. Danny was doing his own work on the Silverado and watching it too, though he pretended he was just checking something on his phone. Ava came out in front of the room the way she came into every room, without performance, just presence. She covered the company's financial results first, quarter by quarter, specific and unsparing about what had gone well and what hadn't. She answered 3 questions from shareholders about the failed merger negotiation with direct language that named her reasoning without apology. Then she paused. The room shifted. "I want to talk about something that isn't on the agenda," she said. Nathan set his wrench down. She talked about the Voss merger campaign, not obliquely, but plainly, naming what it had been and how it had been conducted. She talked about the use of private medical information as a political tool, which she called what it was, a breach. She talked about the board vote and the 8-4 result and what she believed it meant about the company's future. And then she talked about Nathan, not in the way that the gossip articles had, not as a figure to be assessed or interrogated or framed. She talked about a man who stopped on a highway in the rain because someone needed help, and that was the kind of person he was. She talked about a garage on Dunmore and Fifth, where the owner didn't upsell people and had a child's drawings on the waiting room wall. She talked about what it looked like from the inside to watch someone carry an impossible amount without asking for anything from anyone, and what it had taught her about what she valued and what she'd been missing. She did not cry. She was not performatively moving. She was just truthful, in public, in the specific way that makes a room go quiet, not because of drama, but because truth in public is rare enough that people recognize it when they hear it. The foundation, she said, is expanding. Pediatric cardiac care, research, yes, but more importantly, direct access. Families who are currently making the same choices Nathan Reed was making shouldn't have to. The gap between what the medical system provides and what it costs isn't a personal failing. It's a structural one. We can address structural problems with structure. She paused. This isn't charity. Charity implies the problem is solvable with money. This is a commitment to changing how accessible care actually functions. She named the foundation's new program. She named it the Chloe Reed Access Initiative. Nathan found out about that last part the same moment the rest of the room did, because she'd told him the night before she was announcing an initiative, but had kept the name as her own decision. He stood in the garage and read the name on the small screen and felt something in him that had no vocabulary. Danny looked over from the Silverado. "Hey," he said. "You okay?" "Yeah," Nathan said. "You sure?" He picked up his wrench. "Yeah." He went back to work because that was the kind of man he was, and work was real and the Civic's brakes needed doing, and the morning was moving through itself the way mornings do whether or not something significant is happening inside them. The community center opened in October. Nathan had been involved in the planning since May, not because Ava handed it to him, but because he'd pushed back on 3 of the early design concepts, and she'd invited him to the table to explain what he thought was wrong with them. And once he was at the table, he stayed there. The model was his in the way that things become yours when you build them, not ownership, but authorship. A community repair center that employed single parents, offered apprenticeship programs at no cost, and charged sliding scale rates for service work. The idea had existed in pieces in his head for years without a shape. Now it had an address. The first one was on a corner 2 miles from Dunmore and Fifth. The grand opening was on a Saturday, which meant Chloe was there. She had been back at school since June, off 2 of her 3 medications since August, and running at recess in a way that Nathan had not yet fully adjusted to. The first time he saw her run flat out across a field without monitoring herself, he'd stood completely still for 3 seconds before his body understood it was fine, that she was fine, that the thing they'd been working toward for 5 years had arrived and was real and looked like this. An 8-year-old running across a field because she wanted to. She was 9 now. The party was not elaborate. It was a neighborhood thing. Families, coffee, the tables of food that people brought because in communities like this one, food was how you showed up. There were maybe 200 people, which felt enormous and also exactly right. Nathan knew most of them, or knew their cars, which was sometimes the same thing. Ava was there in jeans and a jacket and the flat shoes, moving through the crowd in the way she'd gotten better at over the past year. Not performing ease, but actually finding it in increments, the way you find footing on unfamiliar ground 1 step at a time. Nathan watched her talking to a woman who was starting the apprenticeship program, a single mother of 2 who'd been working in a call center and wanted to learn mechanics the way her uncle had once tried to teach her before he got sick. He watched Ava listen to her with the full attention she gave things that mattered, asking the questions that meant she'd thought about the answer. He thought about October of the previous year, Route 9 in the rain, a flat tire and a window that came down 4 inches, and a woman who looked at a stranger the way anyone looks at uncertainty in the dark. He thought about how easily it could have gone differently, how many other cars had passed before his, how close he'd come to keeping going. He had kept going, and then he turned around. That choice, so small in the moment, so large in retrospect, was the kind that didn't announce itself. It wasn't heroic. He was tired, and his jeans were wet, and he had a poster to pack. He stopped because a person needed help, and he was the kind of person who stopped. That was all it was. But the things that follow from small choices have no obligation to be small themselves. Danny was at the coffee table eating something that Mrs. Cabrera had brought and arguing with Tomas about carburetor theory, which was an argument they'd been having for 2 years and had no obvious endpoint. Mrs. Cabrera was standing with two women Nathan recognized from Whitfield Street, holding a paper cup and expressing what appeared to be strong opinions about something, which was her natural state. Chloe appeared at Nathan's elbow. She had Gerald, because Gerald came to important things. He was more worn than he'd been a year ago. The remaining eye had developed a slight wobble, and his fur had gone from pale gold to almost white from washing. But Chloe continued to consider him operational. "It's good," she said, looking at the room. "Yeah," he said. "You look like you're waiting for something to go wrong." "Old habit." "You should stop." She stood beside him with the particular ease of a child who is recently and legitimately well, which had its own quality, not a performance of health, but an unself-consciousness about her own body that she hadn't fully had before. "Everything's fine. Look." He looked at the room, at the families and the coffee, and the woman talking to Ava about the apprenticeship program, and Danny, and Tomas, and Mrs. Cabrera. At the center itself, 3 bays, a training area, a small waiting room where he'd put a corkboard on the wall that people could pin things to, because he'd always liked what a corkboard said about a place, that it expected to accumulate things over time. "Okay," he said. "Everything's fine." Chloe seemed satisfied. She shifted Gerald under her arm. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and said, "I need to give you something." He looked down. She was holding a ring. It was small and not uniform, handmade clearly, from what looked like copper wire and a small piece of sea glass, pale green, wrapped carefully. He could see where she'd twisted the wire and retried it, could see the imperfections that were also the evidence of effort. "I made it," she said. "In art class. Mrs. Dominguez helped with the wire part because I kept cutting myself. Don't tell Ava that part." He took it from her carefully. "It's for her," Chloe said. "Not like a wedding ring. We're keeping her ring." She looked up at him with the directness that was simply her, the quality that had been hers since before she could articulate it. "I figured you were going to do it eventually, and you'd probably get something expensive and nice, and you should, that's fine. But I wanted her to have this one too. So she knows it's from both of us, not just you." He looked at the ring in his palm. The sea glass was the color of shallow ocean water. "Chloe," he said, "don't make it a big thing." She put her hands in her pockets. "Just give it to her?" He closed his hand around the ring. He found Ava near the window at the front of the center, where the morning light came in at an angle that made the room look like something that had always been there. The woman she'd been talking to had moved on, and Ava was standing with her coffee looking at the people in the room with an expression he'd seen before. The one she had when she'd stopped analyzing something and just started receiving it. He came up beside her. She looked at him. "Chloe made you something," he said. He held out the ring. Ava looked at it in his open hand, the copper wire, the sea glass, the evidence of a 9-year-old's careful and imperfect effort. She reached out and picked it up, turned it in her fingers, looked at the twists in the wire and the place where it had been retried and gotten right on the 2nd or 3rd attempt. Her face did the thing it did when it wasn't performing anything. "She said it's a 'we're keeping you' ring," Nathan said. Her words. Ava looked up at him. "There's something I've been meaning to say," he said. "Not on a back step and not on the phone and not in a hospital hallway. Here, where it's real." He looked at her. "I want to marry you. Not because of what we've been through or what you've done for Chloe, or because the story turns out this way. Because of who you are on an ordinary Tuesday when nothing is happening and you're just in a room being yourself. Because of the way you listen to people. Because of how you hold things that are hard without letting them make you harder." He paused. "Because every version of the future I think about, you're in it, and the versions without you don't make sense anymore." She looked at him for a moment that was longer than a moment. "I have strong opinions about things that aren't my business," she said. "I know. I'll be wrong sometimes, and I'll take too long to admit it. I know that too. I don't know how to do this, Nathan. I've never—" She stopped. "I don't have a version of this in my history to reference." "Neither do I," he said, So we figure it out. She looked at the ring in her hand, the imperfect copper wire, the sea glass, the color of ocean. Yes, she said. Not elaborated, not performed, just the word, clean and direct. The way she said the things she actually meant. He took the ring from her hand and put it on her finger, and it fit imperfectly the way handmade things do. And she looked at it on her hand, and something moved across her face that he didn't try to name. Around them, 200 people continued their Saturday morning, drinking coffee, talking about cars and kids and the apprenticeship program, standing in the October light that came through the windows of a building that hadn't existed a year ago and would still be here a year from now, serving families that needed it, named for a kid who'd spent years being resilient and was now just being 9. Chloe appeared at Nathan's side. She looked at the ring on Ava's hand. She looked at Ava's face. Okay, she said, with the satisfaction of a project reaching its completion. Good. Ava crouched down to Chloe's level. She looked at the ring, then she looked at Chloe. Thank you, she said. It's crooked on the left side, Chloe said. I kept bending the wire wrong. I love that it's crooked. Chloe considered this. Then she held out Gerald. You can hold him, she said, for a minute, because it's a special occasion. Ava took Gerald with both hands. He sat in her palms, looking at her with his one wobbling eye, ancient and pale and enormously dignified. Hi, Gerald, she said. He's shy with new people, Chloe said, but he'll warm up. Chachab. There's a thing people say about stories like this one, that they're about unlikely people finding each other, about wealth and simplicity bridging a gap, about love conquering the machinery of power and family and money. And there is some truth in that, but it misses the actual thing. The actual thing is smaller and more durable. It's about what happens when you stop performing the version of yourself that you think other people need and start being the one that's actually there. Nathan Reed never performed anything. That was both his limitation and his most valuable quality. He didn't have a polished version to offer, so what you saw was what existed. That's not a virtue you can practice. It's just what some people are. Ava had spent her adult life being seen as a category. CEO, billionaire, Kensington. The performance of that identity had become so complete that she'd lost the thread of where the role ended. It took someone who genuinely didn't know who she was to show her that there was still a self underneath it. Not discovered in some dramatic awakening, but just quietly confirmed over coffee at Manny's and fractions at a garage desk and a back step in March and a hospital waiting room. And Chloe, who had spent 8 years with a defective valve and a tired father and a stuffed rabbit with one eye, being resilient without being asked to, teaching herself to braid her own hair and do her own fractions, and read the faces of the people she loved for signs of what wasn't being said, Chloe had known since October that the tire lady was the right kind of person. She'd known it the way children know things, which is to say, without being able to explain the reasoning, but with a certainty that turns out to be right more often than adults expect. The families who came through the community center in its first year were not transformed. That's not how help works, despite what the stories we tell ourselves suggest. They were given a better set of options, a more navigable path, a little more room between the problem and the crisis. That's less cinematic than transformation. It's also more real and more durable and harder to build and worth building. Nathan continued to work. That was always going to be the case, not out of habit, but because the work itself was the thing. The satisfaction of finding what was wrong and making it right, of a customer driving out on a repaired vehicle, of a 17-year-old named Tomas putting his hands on an engine for the first time and understanding how it breathed. Work like that doesn't lose meaning because the financial pressure has eased. It gains it. Ava continued to run her company, which she was very good at, and to be imperfect in the specific ways she had named for Nathan on a back step in March, which included strong opinions about things that weren't her business, and taking too long to admit when she was wrong and being in her head more than was probably healthy. She also continued to ask questions that were actual questions and listen to the answers and change her mind when the evidence warranted it. Those were the things that mattered more than the imperfections, and the imperfections were part of the picture rather than a problem to be solved. There is no version of a life that arrives clean. There is no family that forms without friction, no love that doesn't require ongoing work, no peace that stays in place without maintenance. What Nathan and Ava and Chloe built together was not a solution to anything. It was a structure, a chosen structure, assembled from decisions and returned calls and dinners at a small table in hospital waiting rooms and back steps in the cold and rings made from copper wire and sea glass. The structure held. That's enough. On a Saturday in November, a year and a month after a woman rolled down her window 4 inches in the rain on Route 9 and looked at a stranger deciding whether to trust him, Nathan and Ava stood in the kitchen on Whitfield Street making dinner, which was the pasta, because Chloe had requested it, and Chloe was at the table doing homework with Gerald on the chair beside her, and the television on in the other room, and the jar of pencils, and the ceramic bowl with the coins and the hair ties, and the sound of a Phoenix evening coming in through the window that Nathan had left cracked because he liked the air, and the refrigerator still had Chloe's drawings on it. And there were new magnets from a road trip they had finally taken in August. All 3 of them, 2 weeks, 6 states, Gerald packed in the back seat in a dedicated bag. And the kitchen was warm, and the smell of tomatoes was in the air, and outside the street was doing what streets do, moving through its ordinary night, indifferent and familiar and entirely real. Chloe looked up from her homework. "Dad," she said. "I got 20 out of 20 on the planet's quiz." He turned from the stove. "Including Pluto?" She held up the paper. In the margin, beside the question about the number of planets, she had written 8 or 9, if you're principled, and the teacher had given her full credit and drawn a small star. Nathan looked at the paper. He looked at his daughter. He looked at Ava, who was reading the test over Chloe's shoulder with the expression she had when she found something genuinely delightful, which was a more frequent expression than it had been a year ago. "The teacher agrees with you," Ava said. "The teacher is principled," Chloe said. She put the test back in her folder. "More people should be." She went back to her homework. Nathan turned back to the stove. The pasta cooked and the evening settled and the house held the 3 of them and the one-eyed rabbit and the magnets from the road trip and all the ordinary accumulated evidence of a life being lived. Not perfectly, not without difficulty, but fully and together and going forward. That was all it ever needed to be.